Mysteries come in all different shapes and sizes. Some involve the world around us and how it works, while others try to solve questions about what happened before us and what life was like for ancient people. Solving these mysteries can tell us important information about our own history and provide insight into what our future might look like. Other mysteries are much more personal. Solving a missing person case may not reveal some secret truth about humanity or the universe itself, but it is incredibly important to the missing person and their loved ones. All these mysteries deserve to be solved, but for now, they leave experts and the everyday person alike baffled. Pablo Picasso is one of the most famous painters from the 20th century. Today, he's well known for his cubism and surrealist work, with strange paintings that leave a lot of interpretation up to the viewer. His work has gone on to inspire countless other artists around the world. He passed away in 1973, but even decades later, art historians are still learning more about the famous painter's work and uncovering mysteries that remain unsolved. Picasso ended his life wealthy and well recognized for his work, but he didn't start that way. When Picasso first started out, he was living in poverty and dealing with depression. The difficulties he was facing came across in his artwork, especially in the Blue Period. The Blue Period began around 1900, when Picasso was only 18 years old, and continued until 1904, the start of the Rose Period. During that time, his work was mostly blue or blue-green, with some brown details. The subjects were often people on the outskirts of society, including the homeless and the blind. His mental state and general struggles come through clearly, even if the viewer isn't quite certain what they're looking at. There was some color change to a rose for the Rose Period, with more oranges and reds, but some see the two periods as the same. Picasso's mindset hadn't changed much. It's one of the early paintings in this Blue Period that is the subject of a mystery first uncovered in 2014, but hinted at 50 years earlier while Picasso was still alive. The painting is called The Blue Room and was made in 1901. It was painted while Picasso was still living in Spain and is of his bedroom. The focus of the painting is a woman bathing in a shallow tub in front of a window. Behind her is a bed with two paintings on the wall. A vase of flowers sits on a table. The woman is leaning down with her face away from the viewer. Unsurprisingly, given the name of both the painting and the period, blue is the primary color at work, though there are some reds in the rug on the floor and the flowers in the vase. The woman's hair is a yellow, which contrasts with the rest of the room. One of the paintings on the wall is another of Picasso's works, a landscape, while the other is a poster of May Milton, painted by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. Picasso was just starting out and was trying to associate his work with that of the more famous artist. For years, it stood as an important piece of work for tracing the progression of Picasso's style, as it's one of his first in the Blue Period. But art experts always found that there was something a little off about it. Some of the brushstrokes didn't seem to fit the subject of the work, something which wasn't typical for Picasso. There were some areas where something beneath the surface started to come through. By the 1950s, art experts had come to the conclusion that there was something else beneath but couldn't determine what. It wasn't uncommon for Picasso to paint over other work, especially this early in his career. Canvases were expensive. He would often paint on cardboard if he couldn't afford a canvas. The other option was to paint over old work. Experts believe that that's what happened here. In the 1990s, the work was X-rayed, and the general shape of something came through, but it still wasn't possible to tell what. It wasn't even possible to tell if it was a landscape or something else. That wouldn't come until 2014, when infrared technology allowed historians to look beneath the first layer of paint. Different pigments of paint reflect different levels of infrared light. When analyzed, the hidden layers can be uncovered. What researchers found was shocking. Other Picasso paintings had hidden landscapes underneath, but this was a portrait. A man was clearly visible in the scanned image. He sits with his head leaning against his hand, one finger pointing up to his temple. He has 3 rings on his hand and wears a bow tie. There appears to be something behind his head that could be a pillow. Other details are hard to make out. What looks like a box on a table in front of the subject is actually a painting hanging on the wall in the final painting. Historians were immediately posed with another question. Who is this man? They were able to rule it out as a self-portrait. Picasso would have been 19 at the time the painting was made, and this was definitely not the image of a 19-year-old. In 1901, one of Picasso's closest friends passed away. His passing is said to have inspired Picasso's Blue Period, and he later made portraits of his old friend. But his friend also doesn't seem to have been the subject of this image. One suggestion is that this was a portrait of the art dealer, Ambroise Vollard. Vollard was an important figure in the art scene at the turn of the 20th century. He was able to help many young artists reach a larger audience, and Picasso was one such artist. In 1901, he approached Vollard with all the work that he had made so far, hoping for an exhibit. The exhibition went ahead. It was Picasso's first. It wasn't quite the hit that he had been hoping for, but he and Vollard stayed in touch, and the young artist would soon get the prestige that he wanted. Many artists at the time painted Vollard. Picasso himself said that it was something of a competition between artists, who all wanted to make the best portrait of the influential man. Picasso captured Vollard's likeness in 1910 in a Cubism painting. Many artists asked Vollard not to fall asleep while they painted, and Picasso's painting had Vollard with his eyes closed. Even without many details, there are some similarities between Vollard and the mysterious man beneath the Blue Room painting. The hairline seems similar to that of the man in Picasso's official Vollard portrait years later. The individual's nose also seems to be slightly bent to one side. Vollard was known for his large nose. In some portraits, the shadows almost make it look as if his nose is bent in one direction, which might be the reason why the mystery man's nose looks crooked. Given the time frame, it's possible that Picasso chose to paint Vollard in the hopes that it would impress him when he went in search of an exhibition. Whether the art dealer saw the painting or if Picasso painted over it before ever showing it to him is another unanswered question. A final theory put forward is that this was supposed to be an archetype of someone he saw while staying in Paris, or someone else he was trying to earn the favor of. Unfortunately, unless new letters are uncovered with more details, it's likely that this mystery will remain unsolved. At least 3 Picasso paintings have hidden images beneath them, revealed through infrared scans and X-rays. It's possible that there are others with even more hidden secrets beneath them, which could open up new clues about the artist's early life and career. The Nazca Lines in Peru are one of the most famous wonders of the ancient world that have intrigued archaeologists and everyday people for centuries. But they're not the only mysterious geoglyphs that have baffled experts. Some even older and more widespread are just as strange and intriguing. The works of old men are scattered throughout the Arabian Peninsula and come as far north as southern Israel. The structures are ancient, dating back thousands of years, but it was only in the 20th century that people other than the local tribes came to know of them. It was British RAF pilot Percy Maitland who first described the structures in 1927. He was flying airmail trips to Jordan and could see the strange structures when he looked down at the desert below. He didn't see the awe-inspiring animal shapes that make up the Nazca Lines. These were more geometric in nature, but just as interesting. He wasn't alone in his discovery, and soon pilots were all describing the same things. There were 3 types of geoglyphs described by these pilots. There were wheels of various sizes and shapes. Not all wheels were circular, with some more rectangular in nature, but keeping the general pattern. Many had spokes. Others had 2 that formed a bar across the center of the glyph. Then there were the bullseye glyphs, which unsurprisingly resembled a target with rings within rings. The 3rd type of geoglyph was called kites. These were long shapes that got narrower and narrower before ending in a bulb. Pilots also described what looked like walls that crossed the desert with no apparent pattern or reason. It wasn't long before archaeologists began to study the shapes, though it was more difficult in some places than others. Most of the geoglyphs could barely be seen from the ground. If told that there was something there, it might be possible to make out that there was some kind of structure, but it wasn't until they were viewed from above that they became extremely clear. There also weren't any hills in the region, making it impossible to view the full extent of the glyphs without a plane or something similar. That meant that some could only be viewed by satellite images, as flights over these areas were restricted. These images also led to new discoveries, such as the so-called gate glyphs. These consist of two parallel walls, sometimes connected by one other wall. They're typically short in height, but can run for hundreds of meters. They were named as they reminded researchers of old gates seen on farms. Dating the structures is also difficult. Early estimates simply guessed that they were Neolithic, but getting a more precise date is difficult. The local Bedouin tribes called them the works of old men. If there are oral histories about why these were created, they haven't been shared with archaeologists trying to get to the bottom of the mystery. The tribes also don't appear to have a clear idea of when they were built. Some structures are claimed to be more than 8,000 years old, but scientific dating of kite glyphs puts them between 3,000 and 5,000 years old. This still makes them thousands of years older than the Nazca Lines, which are estimated to have been built between 500 BC and 500 CE. The older date for the structures would put them back to when the Arabian Peninsula first began to be settled. It would mean that these were some of the first things people did after arriving in the area. But the later date roughly lines up with when cattle and sheep farming began to take shape in eastern Arabia. Experts believe they have an answer for the reason for the kite glyphs. It's believed that they were used by ancient people to hunt gazelle that once lived in the area. They would run into the kite at the wide end, then be funneled into tighter and tighter spaces, making it easier for ancient hunters to target them. Some have questioned whether the low-lying walls would have been suitable for this. It's possible these walls were taller in ancient times, but others have suggested that the kites may have been used for keeping herds. If the scientific dating is correct, there may be another problem with this theory, though. The Saudi Arabian desert was green for a time, which was a factor that played an important part in ancient man's migration out of Africa. But this green period ended about 5,500 years ago, hundreds of years before the kites are believed to have been built. This might indicate that hunting had become harder, and new methods had to be created to allow humans to continue to survive. Or the purpose of the kites may still be unknown. Experts are sure that the other structures don't have the same purpose. The gate glyphs, in particular, are never built in the same areas as kites and are often built in places completely inhospitable for animals. That includes locations on the sides of volcanoes. Some of the gates have even been partially covered by later lava flows. Unfortunately, that doesn't help to put a date on the structures, as volcanic eruptions have happened as recently as the 1800s. The wheel and bullseye structures are the most intriguing. Some are made extremely precisely, and may have been created using a stake and a length of rope to create the circle. Others are more rudimentary. Some have standing stones that encircle the wheel, or that lead away from them in lines. Some are found in clusters, with the Ezrock Oasis region having a few different clusters of the circles. Others are more solitary or appear with triangular glyphs pointing towards them. A few possibilities have been put forward for the reason behind these structures. It's possible they might be the remains of ancient homes, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence for this, and it's not a popular theory among scholars. Others believe that the standing stones could mark burial sites. As with many ancient stone structures, there's been speculation on some kind of astronomical significance. For ancient people, tracking the movement of the stars was the best way to keep track of the time of year. Some of the wheels around the Ezrock Oasis region have spokes that appear to line up with the sunrise and sunset during the winter solstice. But most of the spokes don't seem to line up with any astronomical observations. It's possible that the winter solstice connection was just a coincidence, and there's no astronomical significance to any of the structures. It seems likely that different glyphs had different purposes. Thousands have been discovered across a large geographical range, and apparently built over a long period of time. Wheel glyphs have been found over the top of the kite glyphs, showing that these kites were built at a much more ancient time than the wheels. It's possible that what was good for hunting or animal husbandry in one area had a more religious or spiritual significance in another. They might have originally started out with one purpose, such as being a symbol of community, or a way for marking out different territories. But then that meaning changed over time, as the way of life for these people changed. Further archaeology will help to solve this mystery if any other artifacts are found around these strange glyphs. Unfortunately, no such digs have taken place yet, but that only means there's a better chance that the answer to these questions still remains to be discovered. Finding the answer to these mysteries could change our understanding of the ancient Arabian Peninsula. While there were other civilizations living around this area at the general time the structures were made, these tended to be on the outskirts of the peninsula, closer to Mesopotamia. There doesn't seem to be any sign of significant civilization in many of the areas where these ancient structures were made. The structures would have taken a lot of coordination between groups, and the fact they were so widespread seems to indicate an exchange of ideas. Almost a year on from his sudden and unexplained disappearance, the family of Charles Eric Stewart are no closer to finding what happened to him or where he is today. Eric and his sisters, Valerie and Rebecca, were already going through a difficult time at the start of 2023. Their mother had passed away due to cancer during the holiday season, and the siblings were now relying on each other to get them through this time. They were all staying at their mother's home in Beverly, West Virginia, to lean on and support one another. Eric, who was 51 years old, was the youngest in the family. He had been born on the White Mountain Apache in Arizona and was adopted into the family at the age of 2. His adopted family was still in touch with his birth family, and they'd been to visit a few times. He was described by his sister Valerie as having a happy spirit. He was always cracking jokes and trying to make other people happy. The town of Beverly, where they grew up, was a small, quiet town, and Eric was relatively well known. He liked to help people and didn't seem to have any enemies. But Eric was also very trusting of others, which Valerie believes may have made him vulnerable, as others could take advantage of him. Eric also spent his life battling with various problems that his good nature couldn't solve. He was born with fetal alcohol syndrome and struggled to read. When he disappeared, he was reading at a 2nd grade level. He also required daily medication. Despite his problems and the recent loss of his mother, Eric was in good spirits on January 11th, the day he was last seen by his siblings. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary that night. He was making jokes and appeared to be his usual self. He went to bed early, but that didn't seem too strange to his sisters. The next morning, Rebecca left the house early to tend to the animals on her farm. When Valerie woke up and got ready, she found that the house was empty. She assumed Eric had gone with Rebecca, but when Rebecca came home alone, they realized that their younger brother was missing. All his belongings, including his cell phone, were left behind. Eric was an adult, but it was very out of the ordinary for him to leave without telling them, and they knew that something was wrong. But they held on to the hope that Eric would come home by himself. When that didn't happen, the police were notified. Unfortunately, as is often the case when adults go missing, it was initially assumed that Eric had chosen to disappear. This was completely out of character, and his sisters wouldn't accept that as an answer. The work to try to find Eric began. As Beverly was such a small town, news of his disappearance spread quickly. People shared possible sightings, but only one seems to have been substantiated. A passing motorist saw Eric at about 11 a.m. the day after he was last seen. He was just 50 yards from his mother's house and was apparently alone. This was the last time he was ever seen. For some reason, one of the early rumors was that he had gone to Arizona to live on the reservation with his birth family. This rumor seemed absurd to his sisters. Not only would he not disappear without telling them, but they were in contact with his birth family. Nobody in Arizona had seen him, and this potential avenue was ruled out. Almost as soon as the case began, it went cold. A memorial was held in May as Eric's family have tried to raise awareness about this case. His case was featured on NBC's Dateline program, putting it into the national spotlight, but there hasn't been any further update since that point. Valerie believes foul play was involved. According to a Facebook post, there were people who'd been harassing Eric even before their mother passed. Their mother tried to protect him for most of it, so that only got worse after she passed away. Valerie believes her brother made friends with people who didn't have his best interest at heart because he was so trusting. He also received a significant amount of money as an inheritance from their mother, which would have made him an even bigger target for criminals or other shady people. So far, there's been no evidence of foul play, though. It's possible that Eric did choose to leave for his own reasons. If that is the case, his family have asked that he get in touch just to let them know that he's alright. Eric is of Native American, White Mountain Apache descent. He's described as being 5'3" and weighing 125 pounds. He has black hair and brown eyes and wears glasses. His right eye is sometimes noticeably crossed, and he has a scar on his right leg with visible screws. For most of human history, expansions into new areas have involved land bridges being created when sea levels were lower. Humans were able to cross over these bridges into places that had once been islands, and would soon be islands again once the sea levels rose. It may have even allowed the colonization of new continents. When they had to, island hopping allowed people to travel to places via the ocean, but they stayed close to the shore, never traveling too far out into open water. The exception of this was the Polynesians and their ancestors. Starting from the island of Taiwan, these people spread into the Pacific Ocean, exploring first the islands of Southeast Asia and Western Polynesia, then Eastern Polynesia. Easter Island was reached between 1000 and 1200 CE, with New Zealand being reached at the same time. For decades, the theory that Polynesians had managed to conquer the ocean using so-called primitive canoes and star maps baffled European researchers. It wasn't until the 20th century when a test using a device constructed using traditional Polynesian methods proved it was possible that the truth of these seafaring people was accepted. There's still a lot we don't know about when, how, and why the Polynesians expanded to occupy the entirety of the Pacific Ocean. But one of the biggest questions archaeologists have is what caused the long pause. Carbon dating has allowed researchers to determine the general settlement dates for the various islands that the Polynesians inhabited. By 800 BC, Western Polynesia was inhabited. This included the islands of Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. This collection of islands lies just where the near ocean becomes the remote ocean. Up until this point, there seemed to be a near consistent expansion for thousands of years, but then that stopped. According to the archaeological record, there was a gap of around 2,000 years before the Polynesians took to the ocean again. The long pause has been the source of a lot of research and the starting point for a Disney movie. There are two factors that researchers have tried to get to the bottom of: how long it occurred and why. Unfortunately for researchers, Polynesian history was shared orally rather than written down, which makes it harder to distinguish what actually happened. We haven't found written records from the early Polynesians, and what we do have, such as Rongo Rongo writing, remains undeciphered. Because of this, we don't know precisely why people went out into the open ocean in the first place. There could be lots of reasons for this, such as competition for resources. This same factor has driven human migration throughout its history, and likely played a factor here too. Other reasons suggested are warfare with neighboring groups, exile, or a simple desire to find out what was there. It could be nothing more serious than a curiosity and a desire for adventure. Whatever the cause for the initial ongoing expansion, it could also be the cause for the long pause. It may simply have been that the factors that made Polynesians want to explore were no longer there. Alternatively, it may have been that the early Polynesians were simply unable to go any further at that point in time. Researchers have tried to determine if it would have been possible with the early outrigger canoes to go against the winds further out into the Pacific Ocean. There's still some debate over whether this would have been extremely difficult or entirely impossible. But even if it was possible, but just difficult, it may have been that the pull to go and explore these new places wasn't strong enough to outweigh the dangers and difficulty involved. It wouldn't be until the later double-hulled canoes that it became feasible to travel. That would mean that later pulses in exploration corresponded with new technology that allowed the Polynesians to go further west and reach these far-flung islands. But there would have been a period of a couple weeks every year where changes in the winds would have made it easier, even for earlier canoes, to reach some of these islands. While a few weeks wouldn't be a long time, over the course of 2,000 years, there would have been enough time to go and explore these islands. The Polynesians would have quickly learned of the period of time when eastwards exploration was possible, and it would make sense that they would eventually prepare to take advantage of that period. The reason why they apparently didn't remains unexplained. Another possible solution to the technology problem could have been a shift in El Niño patterns, causing a longer period of favorable winds. This still has the same problem of why the Polynesians chose to wait. A third theory suggests that the Polynesians had the ability to travel further east when they first reached Tonga and Samoa, but that ability was taken away before they could go any further. This theory suggests that the paleo tsunamis that tore through the Pacific at the start of the long pause were actually responsible for the pause. The Pacific is a very tectonically active place. The entire ocean is ringed with fault lines that cause volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. The people living on the coasts of this body of water have to be prepared for tsunamis resulting from this activity. Looking back at the historical record, it's not always possible to determine if a tsunami has taken place. Sometimes, in the span of a few months, vegetation begins to grow back on islands previously ruined by tsunamis. Those would leave little impact on the geological record. Some paleo tsunamis have been identified, including one from around 800 BC, which would correspond with the beginning of the long pause, and more 100 years later. Researchers have suggested that these tsunamis could have devastated the Polynesian communities in two ways. First, they would have destroyed canoes and other supplies as well as homes, but even more destructive would have been the people lost. Wayfinding, the art of navigating the ocean using only the stars and knowledge of currents, was an essential element in exploring the ocean. It's a difficult art to master, and the people who were experts in this area were highly valued but rare. If these people were wiped out in a tsunami, it could have taken centuries for their knowledge to be rebuilt. Another element of this theory is a later tsunami, which took place around 1450 CE. This corresponds with an end to open sea voyaging in Polynesia. It's not possible to say for certain whether it's just a coincidence that tsunamis occurred at the same time Polynesians stopped exploring, but it should definitely be considered a possible factor. Finally, it could be a mixture of all these elements that caused the long pause. As more research is done in these regions and more archaeological evidence is discovered, it's possible that this mystery may one day be solved, but for now, it continues to be a point of confusion for experts. Any missing person case is distressing for friends and family left behind, but it's hard to imagine the distress when you know a loved one has gone missing while in an altered mental state. That's the reality currently being faced by the friends and family of Robert Cantrell, who's been missing since June of 2023. Robert is a retired psychologist and father living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time of his disappearance. He owned property in Mexico and was looking to buy more in the area of Cancun. Cancun is known around the world for its picturesque tourist resorts, and it was likely that Robert had this in mind when he decided that he wanted to own property in the area. But away from the tourist spots, there's a darker side to the city, with violent crime being a significant problem. That didn't seem to be worrying Robert when he attended a gala with a friend in Los Angeles on June 17th. Robert was supposed to catch a flight out to Mexico the following day, but for unknown reasons he missed his flight. On or around June 20th, he called his ex-wife and left a voicemail. He was in distress and told her that his belongings had been stolen. He lost his wallet, passport, and luggage and just wanted to return to Jacksonville. By the time his ex-wife tried to call him back, there was no response. The strange voicemail triggered a search in an effort to try to get to the bottom of what had happened to Robert. Friends and family realized he hadn't been seen by any of them since the gala on June 17th, when he'd been acting normally. He hadn't attended the appointment he made with the real estate agent in Cancun, and hadn't contacted anybody other than his ex-wife. It wasn't too unusual for Robert to call her. They were still on good terms, but it was unusual that he hadn't contacted anybody else. Robert's daughter contacted the embassy in Mexico. They were able to confirm that Robert had made it to Cancun on June 20th. According to her, the path he took to Mexico didn't make any sense. Why he didn't make the original flight and why it took so long to get a later flight is just the start of this strange and baffling mystery. According to authorities, the last time he was seen was at the airport in Cancun. Even though he had his belongings stolen, his luggage remained unclaimed at the airport and was eventually shipped back to the United States. For about a week, that was the last information the family knew. Then they discovered a disturbing video on Facebook. It had been broadcast live by a Mexican journalist named Israel Vega. The journalist had discovered Robert wandering on the street. He was shirtless and shoeless and didn't seem to have any belongings with him. Vega recognized that this was a man in distress and brought Robert into his car, recording the incident and sharing it on his Facebook page. Vega asks Robert some questions, trying to figure out who he is and what had happened to him, but Robert struggles to answer. He's eventually able to tell the journalist his name, but then comes up with a story about what he's doing in Cancun. He claims he came there with a group of friends, but they had all left for the United States, leaving him behind. He also says that he'd been to his hotel, but was attacked by a security guard. He also makes references to a black house, but it's difficult to make sense of what he's saying. Robert's daughter described him as having a crazed look in his eyes. At no point does he give Vega a place where he wants to go or any information about someone who he should contact. Robert would have known by now that his family was worried, but they would also be in the best place to help him get home. That was what he was trying to do when he called his ex-wife, but for some reason he doesn't seem concerned with that anymore. In the video, Vega calls an ambulance and Robert is checked out by paramedics. At first, they believe he's under the influence of alcohol, but Robert says he isn't. According to his family, he didn't drink due to his experience at work. He gives the journalist a thumbs up as he's being taken care of by the paramedics, but his family don't believe that means he's feeling okay. The paramedics claimed that he would be taken to a hospital, and then after treatment for dehydration and his minor wounds, to the embassy. It was later confirmed that Robert was taken to the hospital, but he never made it to the embassy. Robert's daughter and niece have led the campaign to try to find their missing relative and get to the bottom of what happened to him. Family members have traveled to Mexico and worked with local investigators to try to find Robert and raise awareness of his missing person case. At one point, a GoFundMe was set up to try to help the case, but it's since been closed. There have been many sightings of Robert, and photos of him were sent to the journalist and shared on his Facebook page. An updated photo showed Robert in a white shirt staring at the camera with wide eyes. Unfortunately, some sightings aren't of Robert but other homeless people living in the area. Despite the time since Robert disappeared, his family still have hope that he might still be alive. He's considered to be vulnerable and was undergoing some kind of medical emergency when he disappeared. Robert is described as 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighed 145 pounds when he vanished. He had light brown or gray hair, a short beard, and green eyes. He had a tattoo of flowers and a whale on his thigh, and a rainbow Star of David tattoo on his calf. Anyone with information should contact the Commission of Missing Persons for the state of Quintana Roo at 52998-881-7150 or Texas EcuSearch at 281-309-9500. In recent times, we've been inundated by shows that show paranormal investigators looking for spirits in abandoned hospitals, prisons, asylums, and houses. But many of these shows fail to capture any solid evidence of the paranormal. But Mark Vernon, a seasoned paranormal investigator with over 4 decades of experience, managed to capture something truly strange while he was visiting Wakefield Cathedral in West Yorkshire, England in 2016. In the footage that he took at the cathedral, he's standing near the cathedral's entrance while filming, and we can hear the sounds of other people hustling and bustling somewhere in the background. Mark appears to take a seat in one of the pews, and he focuses his camera across the aisle when something strange happens that he didn't expect at that moment. A strange, transparent shadow moves from the cathedral's door to the right of the screen. It's all over in about a second, but there's no doubt that something passes in front of his camera, and it's left many people baffled while others are convinced that this is a spirit. Mark, who also claims to be able to communicate with spirits, stated afterward that he believes it to be the ghost of Father Daniel, a monk who lived during the 12th century. He drew this conclusion after he realized that there was a strange audio in the recording, and the spirit seemed to say, "I'm here," as soon as it walked in front of the camera. Mark also stated that he found it strange that the apparition appeared to him in broad daylight, especially since the cathedral sounded quite busy. He added that he'd felt the presence of various other spirits in the building, but unfortunately didn't capture any of them on camera. Given his extensive background, it's no surprise that this isn't the first time that Mark has caught something strange on camera. In August of that year, he visited an old 17th century mansion in West Yorkshire. In this footage, he and a group of people are making their way through the massive house when a strange mist starts to appear in front of his camera. In the first few seconds of the video, it can be seen floating from left to right of the screen while he's standing near an impressive old four-poster bed. As he and another investigator move through the house, the mist seems to follow them around as it appears on the screen a few more times, the last being near an old wooden staircase while he's filming one of the large rooms. In another case, he was investigating an abandoned 1500s asylum when he caught yet another shadow figure on camera after he set up a few stationary cameras to film overnight. But this wasn't the only ghost that was present. He added that he also made contact with the spirit of a little girl during his visit, and that she spoke to him, saying, quote, "There's a bad man over there." He believes she may have been referring to the shadowy figure that he caught just a short while earlier, but couldn't state this with certainty since she only spoke to him and didn't actually appear in any physical form. Many people are skeptical of Mark's videos, with some stating that the ghostly monk may have easily been an insect crawling over the camera, and that it only appears to be transparent because it's so close to the lens. Others are convinced that these buildings are indeed haunted, and that Mark has managed to capture some of these departed spirits on camera. Over the past few years, reports of sightings of strange things in the sky have drastically increased all over the world, and on many occasions, people are able to film these objects, usually with their cell phones. But these videos aren't always taken very seriously, since most phone cameras aren't of the best quality, making it hard to get these objects in focus, since they're usually either very high up in the sky or too far away from the person filming the clip. But on some occasions, one of these objects is spotted by military personnel, and they're able to use their state-of-the-art equipment to document their sighting, which is exactly what happened in the skies above a US operations base in Iraq in 2018, though the exact day and time have not been disclosed. In the footage, which is in black and white since it was being filmed at night, a strange jellyfish-like UAP can be seen floating through the sky as the camera operator does their best to keep up with it. It has an almost robot-like appearance and what looks like tendrils hanging down from its main structure. But it's left many UAP experts scratching their heads as to how it's able to fly the way it does. This is because it shows no sign of any conventional thrusting mechanisms, and it doesn't seem to be very aerodynamic either, though it seems to glide through the air effortlessly, much to the astonishment of Jeremy Corbell, a UAP expert. Speaking about this strange footage, Corbell stated that it appeared over a sensitive military area in Iraq, and that it passed overhead without warning. It then traveled to a nearby body of water, which was later identified as Lake Hibernia, where it disappeared beneath the surface. It remained underwater for the next 17 minutes before reappearing once more, and when it did so, it left the area at high speeds that, according to Corbell, were so fast that the object could not be captured by camera. The object has since been named the Jellyfish UAP, thanks to its strange appearance, and Corbell states that it showed transmedium capabilities, which means that it has the ability to move through space, atmosphere, and water if it wishes to do so. He added that before it went into the water, it performed a perfectly controlled descent, suggesting it was either being piloted by someone or something inside, or that it was being controlled from a remote location. Even more baffling is the fact that the object failed to show up on night vision cameras, and that it seemed to jam the targeting technology used by the camera. In other words, they were unable to lock onto it so that it could be automatically tracked by the camera. As the camera operator follows the strange object, it seems to change color from black to gray and finally to white. A former Marine named Michael Sinkowski has since stated that it isn't the first sighting of a UAP at the base, and that it never appeared to be threatening in any way, eventually becoming akin to somewhat of a ghost story among those who worked at the installation. He since stated that he never saw the object enter the water as Corbell claimed, but instead saw it fly into the distance until he could no longer track it any further. He added that some of the Marines on the base were tasked with finding the object, but at no time was this given any special priority, since it didn't seem to pose any immediate threat. Most businesses have CCTV security cameras installed on the premises to dissuade robbers from entering and helping themselves to merchandise. If this security measure fails, though, the thief will be caught on camera, and they can be tracked down to face the long arm of the law. But since there are so many cameras around these days, they've also been known to capture strange and inexplicable events that seem to defy explanation, though many people believe that some of these videos show paranormal activity. One such person is Jackie Abston, the owner of the Nola T-shirt of the Month Club, which is situated in the French Quarter of New Orleans. She shared some of the store's security footage after she arrived for work one Monday morning in June of 2023 to find one of its doors was standing open. This immediately caused her concern as she worried that the store had been broken into, and so she checked the store's security footage, and what she found left her completely dumbfounded. In the footage, which was recorded at around 10:30 p.m. the previous night, we can see a few racks of t-shirts and some mannequins that are displaying some of the merchandise. But all is dark and as it should be, or so it seems until a few seconds later. Suddenly, and without any logical explanation, one of the doors to the left of the camera opens by itself, and since it has glass panels set into it, we can see that there's no one on either side. This is followed by another strange event. In the reflection in the windows of the door to the right, something seems to move despite the fact that everything inside the shop seems to be completely stationary. For a few seconds, nothing else strange happens until an orb can be seen drifting into view in the bottom left corner. Many people believe that these orbs are the spirits of the departed, though many others think that they're merely specks of dust or insects that are picked up by cameras. After checking the footage, Jackie makes sure that nothing else was disturbed, and she's since stated that she believes the eerie activity was caused by a friendly French Quarter ghost that decided to visit the store. Bigfoot is likely the most famous of all cryptids, as thousands of people have reported seeing the creature in different parts of the world. But the trouble is that no one has ever managed to capture clear and focused footage of it in all the years that its existence has been rumored. The most famous Bigfoot footage was filmed in 1967 in Northern California, and today it's known as the Patterson-Gimlin film. But even this footage has failed to convince skeptics that the creature exists, since it too is out of focus, leading many people to believe that the Bigfoot in question was actually someone dressed up in a Bigfoot costume. In July of 2021, a man uploaded a video to YouTube that's still being hotly debated, as many people think it shows a Bigfoot wading into the water, though others aren't as sure, since the footage is only a few seconds long and proven to be inconclusive. The uploader later stated that the video was recorded by his cousin, who was kayaking on the Cass River in Michigan. While out on the river, he noticed a huge brown creature on the riverbank, and just a few seconds later, it entered the water seemingly carrying something in its arms. Since it was published online, it's been scrutinized by many internet sleuths and cryptid experts, some of which believe the creature is carrying a baby Bigfoot in its arms, while others think it may be carrying a deer that it's caught. The short clip shows a humanoid figure entering the water. At first glance, it seems to have long brown fur and seems completely undeterred by the people who are filming it, which many experts have found strange since Bigfoots are rumored to be very skittish, normally shying away from any form of human contact. At one point in the video, the figure seems to look directly at the camera, but gives no response, which many viewers found strange, since a human would usually offer some kind of acknowledgement when encountering others out in the wild. But it's also been suggested that this isn't a Bigfoot at all. Skeptics have pointed out that it could very well be a person wearing fishing gear, or that they possibly had a mosquito net over their head, giving them a non-human appearance. This would also explain the strange coloring that at first was thought to be its fur. Others think that it may be a fisherman who's wearing waders, but as one expert pointed out, they've never seen anyone wearing waders that reach up over someone's face and head. This theory has been dismissed by one expert from the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch organization, who's thoroughly investigated the footage. He says that the creature's nose is clearly visible in parts of the footage, and hence he believes its head wasn't covered at all. Whether this is indeed a Bigfoot or not is still up for debate, and just like many other videos, it'll likely be discussed for a long time to come. Though Bigfoot surely reigns supreme among the cryptids, the Loch Ness Monster isn't far behind it, as it too has been spotted hundreds of times throughout the years, and yet its existence has never been definitively proven. While some sightings have been quickly debunked, either as logs floating along the Loch's surface or other perfectly normal aquatic creatures, others are much harder to form a solid opinion over. This is mostly because photos and footage of the creature are usually taken from the Loch's banks and hence end up being out of focus. But despite this, many witnesses have come forward to state that they absolutely believe the creature to be real, and that it's been living in the Loch for a very long time indeed. The most famous photo that's ever been taken of the creature fooled millions of people after it was revealed by Robert Wilson in 1934. But it was later found to be nothing more than a toy submarine, and that Wilson had conspired with a group of friends to play a practical joke on the rest of the world. After this deception was revealed, many people became convinced that there's no such thing as the Loch Ness Monster. But since then, there have been thousands of reports from people who claim to have seen it, some providing very detailed descriptions of the creature. There have even been groups of investigators who spent days and weeks at the water's edge in hopes that they would catch a glimpse of the monster, which is affectionately known as Nessie. But with modern technology's advancements, this is no longer necessary. Stationary cameras have been set up by an organization called Visit Inverness Loch Ness, and they can be accessed by anyone with a stable internet connection, making it much easier for enthusiasts to keep an eye on the water in case the creature decides to make an appearance. One man who was watching the live stream has reported that he's certain that he spotted the monster moving through the water, and that he has the video evidence recorded as proof. In the first of the two clips, which was recorded at 8:13 p.m. on the 6th of September 2022, a dark shape can be seen moving beneath the water's surface, and it remained in the camera's view for around 4 minutes while doing so. He stated that it was the only spot on the loch that showed any dark shadows, and hence he assumed that something large was swimming underneath the water's surface. In the second clip, a shape that's reported to be between 6 and 8 feet long can be seen moving through the loch. But since scientists have previously speculated that the monster could in fact be a giant eel, not everyone believes that this footage shows the mythical and long-debated creature. Though this is by no means definitive proof of Nessie's existence, the footage has certainly sparked a lot of interest among cryptid enthusiasts and online sleuths alike. Some of the clearest ever footage of unidentified objects in the sky, known as UAPs, has been recorded by people aboard planes, either by passengers or, on some occasions, by pilots who spot something that seemingly doesn't belong there. These objects have often been found to completely defy the laws of physics as we know them, flying at speeds that should be impossible and maneuvering with an agility that none of our aircraft have ever possessed. One video that was recorded in January of 2024 shows such an object, but the person who recorded it had no idea that they were filming something out of the ordinary at the time, and it would only be when she reviewed the footage that she realized she may have captured a UAP on camera. 36-year-old Denisa Tanasi has been a flight attendant for just a year and was working during a flight from Luton, just north of London, to Poland, when she looked out of the plane's window and saw a stunning view of the ground below. She then decided to record a short video clip, and once she'd done so, she put her phone away and didn't think much about it. That is, until she decided to look at the footage about 20 minutes later, and that's when she noticed that there was something else in the sky with them, though she has no explanation as to what it could be. To add to the mystery, Denisa is adamant that when she looked out the window while recording the clip, the object wasn't visible to the naked eye, and as soon as she spotted the strange object in the footage, she showed it to the plane's pilot. She asked whether he had seen anything like the object in the footage just a short while earlier, but he stated that he hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary, and that the plane hadn't encountered any turbulence or other ill effects. The object in question appears to be at the top of the screen while she's filming the lights on the ground. It has a strange purple or pink glow, and she describes it as a circular object unlike anything she's seen before. At first, she and her fellow cabin crew members thought that she may have accidentally filmed a reflection of her own uniform, since it's also pink. But when she looked at the footage more closely, she realized that the object was outside the plane, and it showed signs that it was flying through the air. Furthermore, she stated that the pink light seemed to flash, further convincing her that it couldn't possibly have been her uniform's reflection. She added that when she first saw the footage, she didn't feel frightened at all, and instead became excited at the prospect that she caught a UAP on camera. She's believed in the possibility of extraterrestrial life for a long time, but is now more convinced than ever, as she believes the object is an extraterrestrial craft that was flying alongside the plane for reasons unknown. When she showed the video to her family, they were just as astonished as she was, and her husband agrees with her that the footage is undeniable proof that extraterrestrials have been visiting our planet on a regular basis. While others are more skeptical, claiming that this was indeed a reflection, or possibly a light burning in the plane's cabin, many others have stated that they also believe this footage is of an extraterrestrial craft, despite the light only appearing in the footage for a few short seconds. A quick search online will provide you with thousands and thousands of videos that purport to show paranormal activity, specifically of the kind that's associated with poltergeists that are active inside people's homes. This type of footage usually shows furniture being moved around by an unseen force, doors opening and closing of their own accord, and in some instances, people being scratched by unknown entities that are said to be present in their houses. One couple, Jorge Luis Cruz Molina and his wife, who's not been named, have uploaded a video to their TikTok account that they claim shows the strange activity caused by a poltergeist in their house, which is situated in Erie, Pennsylvania. They've since stated that they refuse to let this entity ruin their lives, and that they'll stop at nothing to ensure that it's removed from their home. In the clip, Jorge's wife can be seen in their living room packing something away in a container that's been placed on the floor. But while she's doing so, the door, which has been left ajar, suddenly slams shut without explanation, causing her to jump with fright. She immediately retreats with her hand covering her mouth, and just a few moments later, she rushes to the door to open it but finds that she's unable to do so, despite frantically pulling and turning at the doorknob. She stops and seems to start calling for help, but she's interrupted when a plastic container to her right shifts on the shelf where it was placed before it falls off to the floor with a crash. She retreats once more, still calling for help, and when she rushes the door this time, it inexplicably opens without any effort. A second clip that the couple uploaded shows their kitchen at night while everyone in the house is asleep, but not everything is as peaceful as it seems. On the far side of the room, a plastic bin suddenly shifts across the floor by itself. This is followed by one of the floor-level cabinets inexplicably opening, and just seconds later, the fridge opens of its own accord, flooding the room with an eerie light, but it slams shut again after just a few moments. In another room, a rocking chair suddenly starts rocking back and forth, even though there's no one anywhere near it, and a small bench that's been placed in the adjacent room suddenly shifts towards the camera, as if being pushed by an invisible hand. At times during the video, it seems as though the chair is about to stop rocking, only for it to be pushed once more, resulting in the eerie sound of the bottom of the chair moving against the wooden floor. Just when it all seems to be over, the same bench is pushed even further, and this time it makes it all the way into the same room as the rocking chair. Since the clips were uploaded, many people have offered their advice, suggesting that the couple contact an exorcist to get rid of what they believe to be a poltergeist. Many people refuse to keep dolls in their houses, as they find them to be extremely creepy, especially when they encounter them in the middle of the night. But there are many more who collect dolls, with some collectors owning hundreds that they then display in their houses. Yvonne Hydes, an event organizer who hails from Paisley, Scotland, received a doll named Agnes as a gift in 2013, and she claims that it's displayed some unusual and frightening behavior ever since. On one occasion, she'd placed the doll in a bag, which she then put in the trunk of her car. But while she was driving along, she started hearing strange knocking sounds. She decided to move the doll to her car's back seat, and as soon as she did so, the knocking sounds stopped, which she found strange. But once the doll was in her house, she started noticing more strange activity, such as furniture being moved around and knocking sounds coming from the walls. During one incident, she'd placed the doll in her dining room, after which she stood in her kitchen's back door to have a cigarette. But while she was there, she suddenly heard 3 distinct knocks coming from the dining room walls. She shrugged it off, convincing herself that it was just her neighbor who made the sounds, but she stated that ever since, she feels as though someone is watching whenever she's in that room. The following day, the activity only continued. She was in her bedroom getting ready, and she once again heard 3 knocks. Only this time it was coming from her bedroom door. That night, she heard footsteps on her upstairs landing, and has since heard the knocking sounds on several occasions. On another occasion, Yvonne noticed that one of her heavy lamps had been moved to the middle of the room without explanation, and when her son saw the same thing, he asked why she had moved it there, and she explained that it wasn't her doing but the doll's. Her family has also noticed that their dog, a Cocker Spaniel, has taken an aversion to the doll, and that it starts growling whenever it comes near. She then decided to involve the Scottish Ghost Company, a paranormal investigation group that did a thorough investigation. They've since claimed that the doll is haunted by the spirit of a woman named Teresa, who wasn't in any way dangerous. They claim that Teresa was a teenage girl, and that her spirit enjoys being in the car with Yvonne. When the doll was returned to her, she became frightened one night when she saw an unexplained shadow, though she was still uncertain whether it belonged to the doll or not. In a video that was posted to Instagram during the group's paranormal investigation, the doll can be seen blinking without explanation, leading to many viewers believing that the doll is indeed haunted. Not many people know that Ouija boards were invented as a toy for children, and that they only gained their notorious reputation thanks to horror movies, in which they've been used to summon the spirits of the departed, or in some cases, demons. Nevertheless, many people refuse to have these items in their homes, as they're now seen as something sinister that could invite unwanted negative energies or spirits into their homes, though others are less sensitive about using them. It would seem that a Ouija board is at the center of a paranormal mystery that's being investigated in Mansfield, Nottinghamshire in England, after a piano was seen playing notes without anyone around. Lee Roberts, a paranormal investigator, first saw the strange phenomena while he was out at a Grade 2 listed building called The Village, and he since released a video in which the piano can be heard playing the same two eerie notes. He stated that he believes the activity may have been caused by other paranormal groups and investigators who've been known to hold seances in the building on a regular basis, in particular with the use of a Ouija board. But Lee isn't the first person to hear the ghostly piano playing its strange tune. Many others have reported hearing the same two notes being played, but Lee was the first one to set up a camera in order to confirm these claims. Strangely, none of the other notes are ever played, but the same two notes are always repeated. Lee first thought that it may be the result of dropping temperatures inside the building, which then caused the piano's wires to tighten and ultimately caused the keys to sound. But he found that there were no windows anywhere near the piano, and when he conducted a few tests, he discovered that temperatures in that room remained pretty much constant during the day and night, leaving him with no explanation other than that there was a spirit present. He added that when other paranormal groups carry out experiments in the building, they often use a ledge table that's situated near the piano, and he believes that this has resulted in the piano becoming haunted. He suggests that the piano is being played by a spirit that's been contacted in the past, and that it's doing so to attract attention. He also had other strange experiences while visiting the same building. On one occasion, he noticed a strange mist in the building, and he also managed to capture that phenomenon on camera. He since suggested that the mist was in fact the spirits of 7 monks who used to work in the building, but sadly passed away when a fire broke out. Talking to the press, Lee stated that if there is such a thing as ghosts, he imagines a piano would be the perfect way for them to make their presence known to those who are still living, though it isn't clear why they would do so, other than being summoned by someone in the past. He also added that he and his team, all of whom have also heard the piano playing by itself, will return to the building in the future to look for other answers and other explanations to the phenomena. He adds that even if he finds that the entity is a demon, he'll still attempt to interact with it so that he can collect proof of its existence, despite the dangers that could prove to his own safety. Skinwalkers are said to be terrifying humanoid creatures that mimic the sounds of someone in distress. These creatures have been reported to call for help in either a woman's or a child's voice, and anyone who arrives to render aid is sure to have a terrifying encounter. Some people believe that they're actually humans, but these people are witches who have the ability to change their shape into animals, such as wolves or coyotes, while others think that they're paranormal entities that have no link to humans, other than considering them as prey. Those who think they used to be human explain that while they're still in their human form, they committed an act that was so foul that it resulted in them transforming into shape-shifting creatures known as skinwalkers. They're also thought to have been responsible for tragic events in the past, such as crops failing to produce, marriages ending up on the rocks, people suddenly passing away, or diseases suddenly spreading through a community. One TikTok user claims to have captured footage of this elusive creature, and they've posted the video online as proof. In the footage, the man, known only by his username, it's Louis Vuitton, can be seen hanging out the passenger side of a car with one of his friends while two are on the lookout for animals in a field. At one point, he can be heard telling the driver to slow down when he thinks he spotted something in the grass and says, "I thought I saw a big buck or something." The man then slows the car down and he uses a flashlight to point the creature out. But it soon becomes obvious that it isn't a buck, and a strange sound can be heard coming from a field, something similar to a cat yowling. He can then be heard yelling, "What is that?" clearly taken aback by what he's seeing. As he zooms in, we see a strange white humanoid creature standing in the field, and it seems to be looking directly at them while holding its arms threateningly at its sides. A few moments later, the uploader can be heard shouting, "That's not a buck," and as he does so, the creature seems to charge at the vehicle and the footage abruptly ends. Frustratingly, they've provided no further details about the clip, which has been viewed more than 6 million times on TikTok, though many users were quick to state what they thought the creature might be. One commenter was quick to point out that skinwalkers typically have fur on their bodies and that they appear in animal form, suggesting that this creature is likely a Wendigo since it has a human form. Others aren't so sure that this creature's anything out of the ordinary at all, since they believe this is a man who is positioned in the field ahead of time so that his friends could film him for an elaborate hoax. They strengthened this argument by stating that if the footage was of an actual skinwalker, then the uploader would have added a lot more detail, such as where the footage was recorded, what time of year it was, and what happened after the footage ended. But many others believe without a doubt that this is indeed a skinwalker, and that the two men were lucky to escape their encounter with their lives. For now, there's no definitive answer, and we're left to speculate whether this is indeed a cryptid that was caught on camera, or just a well-thought-out hoax that managed to fool thousands of viewers. Marietta sits in Cobb County, Georgia, and is home to around 60,000 residents. Compared to surrounding cities, Marietta is somewhat smaller and has a closer-knit feel to it. It would be in this city that 26-year-old Tiffany Witten would disappear without a trace. Her case didn't garner the widespread mainstream attention that her counterparts did, calling into question how certain groups of people are underrepresented in the media. On January 30th, 1987, Lisa Daniels welcomed Tiffany Michelle Witten into the world. This would be the highlight of Lisa's year, as just months later, she and Tiffany's father would divorce. Lisa described her daughter as outgoing, but when she turned 2, Lisa sensed there was something different about her daughter. She told Esquire, who ran a full-length article about Tiffany's disappearance, that she would find toys that didn't belong to her in her toy box. When asked, Tiffany said that other children had given them to her, but Lisa knew that she was lying. She added, quote, "She was stealing from daycare. I would ask about it. She'd say someone gave it to me. She was also a pathological liar. She just got better at it over the years." Tiffany's troubling behavior continued into her adolescence, and her mother and grandmother noticed that she began hanging around with the wrong crowd. Tiffany was an intelligent and capable young woman who had dreams of becoming a vet. If she had put her mind to it, there's no doubt she would have aced medical school, but other things began to catch Tiffany's eye. 2 years before she was due to graduate high school, Tiffany announced to her family that she was dropping out. Despite their best efforts, neither Lisa nor her mother could convince Tiffany otherwise. Once Tiffany had made her mind up, the decision was final. Instead of pursuing her education, Tiffany would hang out at friends' houses, and it's at this point that Lisa believes Tiffany was introduced to the world of illegal substances. Shortly after dropping out, Tiffany discovered she was pregnant. Being just 16 with no house and no job, she made the difficult decision to give the baby up for adoption. Once this had gone through, Tiffany slipped back into her old ways. Shortly after her 21st birthday, Tiffany gave birth to her second child, Addison. By this point, Tiffany had fallen off the deep end in terms of addiction, and Addison was sent to live with Tiffany's grandmother. 3 years after Addison was born, Tiffany's life would take another turn, this time for the worst. She and several others were arrested in Dalton, Georgia, for breaking into the home of Tracy Chambers, who apparently owed her $60. Tiffany and the others were slapped with prison sentences, and this was enough to shake Tiffany. She vowed to serve her sentence and then enter rehab with the help of her mother and grandmother. The pair promised Tiffany that if she were to complete the program, she would be an active part of her daughter's life. While in rehab, Tiffany did well and was on the path of the straight and narrow, but outside the safe confines of support, Tiffany began to slip. She had gotten a job at IHOP as a waitress and tried to get her life together. As she spiraled, so too did her career, and things finally came to a head when she met Ashley Red Cottle, who was a fellow user. The pair quickly moved in together, and Tiffany left IHOP behind. Her mother knew the relationship was toxic but was powerless to convince her daughter. Neighbors often heard the pair screaming at each other, only to reconcile hours later and continue as if nothing had happened. This pattern of behavior continued well into 2013. September 8th of 2013 marks the final day that anyone in Tiffany's family had contact with her. Just a few days later, Tiffany would disappear off the face of the earth. According to Ashley Cottle, he, Tiffany, and two other friends, Stephen Winstein and Jason Zuccarini, spent the evening of September 12, 2013 taking substances at his home in Marietta, Georgia. Just after 12:30 a.m., Tiffany and Ashley left their home in Ashley's truck, headed for the Marietta Walmart. CCTV cameras captured the pair entering the 24-hour store just after 1 a.m. The pair had a large trolley and moved around the aisles, piling clothes and other items into the trolley. Those who have seen the footage, including Tom Janad, the author of the Esquire article, noted how strange Tiffany's movements are. He commented, quote, "She never stops moving, and it's almost as if she's dancing or trying to stay on a horse. She throws shirt after shirt and outfit after outfit into the cart and behaves so suspiciously that to see the tape is to wonder if she's trying to get caught or if she's trying to get caught in order to escape." Walmart employees working the night shift quickly picked up on Tiffany's strange behavior and began to monitor the two. After an hour of browsing and picking out clothes, the two headed to the checkouts where an argument broke out. The footage confirms that Ashley grabbed a few items to purchase, while Tiffany abandoned the cart that she'd had for the past hour. While Ashley pays for his goods, Tiffany walks toward the exit, where she's stopped by two loss prevention officers. They immediately block Tiffany's path and grab hold of her. It's believed that Tiffany had been accused of stealing around $20 worth of items. What happened next would kickstart one of the most bizarre missing person cases ever. Instead of speaking to the loss prevention officers, Tiffany does something bizarre, and it's all captured on CCTV. In a moment's notice, she wiggles out of her handbag, kicks off her flip-flops, and begins running toward the exit. CCTV footage confirms that Tiffany ran out of the doors, out of the parking lot, and into the world beyond. Ashley Cottle and the two prevention officers were frozen in disbelief, and nobody ran after her. This would be the last time that 26-year-old Tiffany Witten was ever seen or heard from again. Following the bizarre incident, Ashley left Walmart, hopped into his truck, and returned home. He made no concerted effort to locate his girlfriend. In fact, nobody would know she was missing until Ashley told his parole officer 2 weeks later. Tiffany's family went months without hearing from her, not knowing that she had disappeared on September 13, 2013. Ashley acted bizarrely in the months after Tiffany's disappearance. Anita, her grandmother, scorned Ashley for not calling them, to which he replied, quote, "I wish I had that purse I bought her. It was a Coach purse and it was really expensive." Tiffany Witten was not officially reported missing until 2014. The Cobb County Sheriff's Office conducted a search of the Walmart and the surrounding areas but found no sign of Tiffany. Ashley Red Cottle is considered a person of interest, and his home was searched thoroughly, but again, no evidence has been uncovered. There are a plethora of theories available in Tiffany's case, and Tom Janad raised an important question in his article. Did Tiffany want to get caught so that she could escape a volatile relationship? Did she run from Walmart not because she feared arrest, but because she feared for her life? Tiffany Michelle Witten is described as a white female with blonde hair, green eyes, 5'3" and 105 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Michael Selleck of the Marriott Police Department at 770-794-5300, quoting case number 1400471. May 20th, 1981 marked a new chapter for the Kess family of New Jersey. Drew and Joyce Kess welcomed their first child, Jennifer, into the world. A few short years later, they would welcome Logan into the world, and their family would be complete. New Jersey no longer held anything for the Kess family, so they packed up and moved to Florida. The move would be easy for Jennifer and Logan, and they settled into their new schools with ease. In 1999, Jennifer graduated from Vivian Gaither High School in Tampa, Florida. Her friends described her as an intelligent and outgoing young woman who was always there for them. No matter what the issue was, Jennifer would be there to support her friends, as they were there to support her. She was popular in high school, owing to her friendly disposition, and it was no surprise that following graduation, she was granted a place at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. UCF is just 84 miles from Jennifer's parents' home in Tampa, and during her time at university, she would make the trip several times a month to see her family and friends. Jennifer studied diligently in 2003 when she graduated from the University of Central Florida with a degree in finance. During her time as a student, Jennifer had undertaken an internship with a timeshare company in Orlando. Following her graduation, she was offered a full-time position, which she was extremely pleased about. She worked in the finance department and also worked as a project manager. Jennifer's hard work and determination shone through at her first graduate position, and she quickly climbed the ranks, gaining herself several promotions. By 2005, Jennifer was 24 years old and was excelling in her career. The promotions meant that she had enough money to buy her first apartment in a quiet, gated community in Orlando. The complex was complete with a security guard, which was a deciding factor for Jennifer when she was purchasing the place. Jennifer knew that being a woman alone made her more of a target, but she hoped that her boyfriend, Rob Allen, would eventually move in with her in the future. In early 2005, the pair had begun dating, and the relationship was described as solid. Rob lived in Fort Lauderdale, and the pair would take turns to make the 213-mile drive each weekend to see each other. The pair decided to set out in 2005 in style by holidaying in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. The holiday was just what the pair needed after a stressful year at work. On January 23, 2006, Jennifer and Rob arrived back in the mainland USA, and Jennifer immediately drove to Orlando to attend work. Jennifer's mother, Joyce, confirmed to investigators that she spoke with her daughter that morning via phone, and the two chatted about their vacation. By all accounts, Jennifer was ecstatic, and according to Joyce, quote, she was on a cloud. That evening, Jennifer arrived at her apartment in the 3700 block of Conroy Road after a long but exciting day at work. At around 10 p.m., Jennifer called her parents again before calling her boyfriend, Rob Allen. Despite the idyllic holiday the two had shared, there was a secret tension in their relationship. The long-distance barrier was beginning to wear on Jennifer and Rob, and their call ended with a small disagreement. This was the last time Jennifer Kess was ever seen or heard from again. When January 24, 2006 rolled around and Jennifer was not at her desk, her boss became worried. Jennifer had recently been promoted to financial analyst and was considered a responsible employee. Her boss called her parents, who stopped everything and drove from Tampa to Orlando. When they arrived at her apartment, they found a typical scene. A damp towel lay over the bathroom sink, as if she'd washed her hair that morning, ready for work. Her family also found clothes neatly laid out on the bed and makeup sat ready on the bathroom counter. By all accounts, Jennifer had awoken that morning with every intention of going to work, so where was she? Her apartment door had been locked and her car was missing from the parking lot. Her family spoke with the security guard and the apartment staff, but nobody recalled seeing or hearing anything out of the ordinary that morning. Jennifer's phone, purse, and keys were missing from her apartment, as if she had left that morning, but if so, where had she gone? Hours after Jennifer's parents were first alerted to her disappearance, they contacted the Orlando Police Department to formally report their daughter missing. Large-scale searches were conducted within the immediate area of Jennifer's apartment, but investigators came up blank. On January 26, 2006, investigators would stumble across their first clue. During a broadcast of Jennifer's disappearance, a witness realized they recognized Jennifer's car. The witness told investigators that a black 2004 Chevy Malibu had been parked in the parking lot of another apartment complex just a mile from Jennifer's apartment. When investigators arrived, they soon confirmed the car belonged to Jennifer. Inside, they found a DVD player, but no other signs of Jennifer. According to reports, a small DNA sample and fingerprint were recovered from the car, but these samples were too insufficient for full testing. While investigators hadn't uncovered anything bizarre from the CCTV at Jennifer's apartment, they unknowingly struck gold when they decided to check the complex where her car was found. At around 12 p.m. on that day, Jennifer disappeared. An unknown person can be seen driving Jennifer's car into the parking lot, sitting in the car for a minute before exiting the car and leaving on foot. Investigators hoped this would be the clue that they needed, but they didn't count on their suspect being one step ahead of them. According to reports, the cameras at the complex where Jennifer's car was found were programmed to capture pictures every 3 seconds, as opposed to being live cameras. Whether the suspect knew this or not remains to be seen, but during each interval, the suspect's face is obscured by a gate. The only information investigators have been able to discern is that the suspect is around 5'3" to 5'5", but they're still unsure on gender. Since Jennifer's disappearance, her case has become popular with online sleuths, who are enamored with the CCTV footage and the cunning of the suspect. According to Jennifer's parents, in the weeks before her disappearance, she did express concerns that the complex was not as safe as it was made out to be. Was Jennifer correct? Was someone stalking Jennifer, waiting for the right time to strike? Or was this a crime of opportunity? Years have passed without word, and Jennifer's family continued to fight for answers and justice. Jennifer Joyce Kess is described as a white female with blonde hair and green eyes, 5'8" to 5'9", and 120 to 130 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Orlando FBI office at 407-875-9976, quoting case number 0632039. In 2009, 18-year-old Jackson Miller proudly walked across the stage and accepted his high school diploma. Jackson and his parents, Gina Funaro and Paul Miller, lived in Cupertino, California. Gina and Paul worked hard to create a safe environment where Jackson could flourish and grow. As a teenager, Jackson loved swimming and was noted as exceptionally intelligent. While Jackson had a happy home life and a strong academic career, mental health issues don't discriminate. These issues can affect anyone from anywhere at any time, and it's estimated that at least 1 in 4 adults will suffer from mental health issues in their lifetime. Jackson was one such person. His parents took him to many doctor visits and therapy sessions, where they discovered he was suffering with OCD, depression, and anxiety. For these issues, Jackson had been given medication and was undergoing therapy. OCD is a condition that's perhaps the most misunderstood, and is extremely difficult for sufferers to live with. It has nothing to do with neat and tidiness, as many people seem to believe, but rather it's characterized by repetitive, obsessive behaviors and thought patterns that sufferers are often completely unable to maintain control of. Paired with depression and anxiety, Jackson was struggling. Despite his struggles, Jackson had enrolled at De Anza College and was determined to graduate and kickstart his post-grad life. In May of 2010, Gina and Paul noticed a change in Jackson, and unfortunately it's not a positive one. He was increasingly erratic and paranoid and may have been off his medication. As a result, Jackson was not sleeping well, which only exacerbated his condition. Gina and Paul made it clear to Jackson, who lived with them, that they were there for him and offered all of their support. On May 15, 2010, Jackson left the family home in Cupertino, California, in his 2004 silver Honda Pilot. He told his parents he was attending a therapeutic meeting, but in reality, he was driving elsewhere. As Gina and Paul watched their son pull out the driveway, they had no idea it would be the last time they would ever see him alive. Later that afternoon, CCTV cameras captured Jackson parking his 2004 silver Honda Pilot at the parking lot at the south entrance of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California. Minutes later, the same cameras captured Jackson leaving his car on foot, never to be seen or heard from again. When Jackson failed to return home that evening, his parents immediately alerted the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. On May 17, 2010, investigators found Jackson's abandoned car, and inside they found his wallet, phone, iPod, and other personal belongings. CCTV footage confirmed that Jackson had abandoned the car on May 15th, shortly after 4 p.m. All other cameras on the bridge were investigated thoroughly, and there were no further sightings made. Bizarrely, there were no splashes in the water under the bridge, which ruled out the possibility that he had gone over the side. With little evidence, investigators quickly found themselves at a dead end. Jackson's disappearance made local headlines, and investigators were perplexed when a handful of possible sightings were reported. These witnesses claimed to have seen Jackson in the Fisherman's Wharf area of San Francisco, although these sightings never materialized. In 2014, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office received a bizarre call from a resident in South Lake Tahoe, California, over 196 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. This resident reported seeing Jackson in the area on several occasions, right up until July of 2014. These sightings were also investigated, but nothing ever came of them. Jackson's family learned of conflicting evidence in his case. According to his father, the Coast Guard did capture a splash in the water on the day that he disappeared, but CCTV cameras operated by the Golden Gate Bridge didn't see anything in the water. So what was the truth? Another possible sighting of Jackson was made in 2021, and this time there was CCTV footage to go with it. On March 26, 2021, a witness in Woodland, California, called the police after she reportedly saw Jackson Miller. She told investigators that he approached her in the parking lot of Target, asking for a cigarette and a ride to Sacramento. She was unfortunately unable to offer the young man either of these things, so he asked that she call an Uber or taxi for him. The pair engaged in conversation, in which the young man told the woman that he was a missing person named Jackson. The man left shortly after, and that's when the woman contacted the police. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Office was sent in to investigate, and they uncovered a bizarre piece of CCTV footage. In the clip, the man who's believed to be Jackson Miller is seen entering Target wearing shorts. Minutes later, he leaves wearing different clothes, a dark green jacket and black pajama pants. The man is also wearing a face mask, which obscured most of his features. This new lead brought great hope to the Miller family, who have remained steadfast in believing that their son is still alive. The Millers told the media that they believe their son is likely living at a homeless or youth shelter, but can't fathom why he hasn't contacted them in 13 years. Gina, Jackson's mother, told Oxygen, quote, "The best thing in the world would just be to hear him say, 'Hi, Mom,' and just know that he's okay. We just want to verify that he's still alive and healthy. We can't understand why he would never contact us because we were close. This is the biggest mystery." There's also another theory in Jackson Miller's case, one that connects him to 4 other missing person cases in San Francisco. According to the Facebook page California Missing 5, Jackson is the first in a string of bizarre disappearances. The other 4 cases possibly connected to his are Cameron Rimmer on October 6, 2011, Sean Dickerson, December 2, 2011, Christian Hughes, February 7, 2013, and Sean City, May 21, 2013. Jackson Alexander Miller is described as a white male with brown hair, blue eyes, and 5'10" to 5'11", and 150 to 160 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Alan Munoz of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office at 408-808-4400, quoting case number 10135-0430C. On November 28, 1982, Ellen Tant welcomed her daughter, Brandy Ellen Wells, into the world. The mother-daughter duo lived in Tyler, Texas, and enjoyed a happy and comfortable existence. From the day she was born, Ellen knew her daughter was destined for greatness. As a little girl, Brandy sang every day and wanted nothing more than to become a popular singer. Unfortunately, things wouldn't turn out the way Brandy had hoped, and her life would take a horrifying path. Those who knew Brandy described her as a bright and vibrant young woman with a great voice and an ethereal spirit. While Brandy wanted to pursue music, she also knew that education was important and excelled academically. In the year 2000, Brandy graduated from Chapel Hill High School with excellent grades. Her hard work and determination had paid off in her favor, and she was awarded a full scholarship to the University of Texas. University was everything Brandy hoped it would be, and during her time there, she became an integral part of the Flag Corps. Brandy proudly twirled flags for the UOT's football team and began to make a name for herself on campus. During her second year of studies, Brandy caught the attention of one man in particular. According to reports, the two quickly fell in love and decided to get married. But unfortunately, their love didn't last, and years after their union, the couple would divorce. During her time as a married woman, Brandy had dropped out of college to focus on work and her relationship. In 2005, Brandy moved to Brownsboro, Texas, and re-enrolled in university, this time choosing to attend the Trinity Valley Community College. At Trinity Valley College, Brandy would follow the path of education, telling her mother that she wanted to teach kindergarten. Like before, Brandy excelled in her studies and was known as a warm and friendly young woman. As Brandy no longer lived at home, she found a part-time job at a local Walmart and had recently moved in with a roommate. By all accounts, everything in Brandy's life was going perfectly. She had a new job, was continuing her studies, and even picked up a position in the Flag Corps at Trinity Valley Community College. In mid-2006, she decided to surprise her mother Ellen by showing up at her home in Tyler, Texas on August 3, 2006. Unfortunately for Ellen, the visit was only brief, as Brandy had plans to hit the town. After getting changed, Brandy asked her mother if she could borrow her car, but Ellen said no as she was low on gas. Brandy had in fact asked her mother to borrow her car as she too was low on gas. But despite this, Brandy left her mother's home in her 2000 Pontiac Grand Prix and headed into town. Instead of heading to one of the bars or clubs in Tyler, Texas, where Brandy would have run into people she knew, she decided to travel to Longview, Texas, about 40 miles from Tyler. Ellen would later comment that she was unsure why Brandy went to Longview, as she didn't know anyone in the area and had never been there before. During the drive, Brandy made several calls to the Graham Central Station bar, asking them for directions. As she'd gotten lost several times, the drive had taken Brandy far longer than she expected, and sometime after 10:30 p.m., she finally arrived at the bar. When she arrived at the club, she asked several members of staff for help as her car had ran out of gas. Brandy ordered non-alcoholic drinks and spoke to several people in the club that evening. 2 hours after arriving, Brandy decided to call it a night and left Graham Central Station. According to witnesses, they saw Brandy making her way to her Pontiac Grand Prix, but nobody saw her leaving. The following morning, Ellen awoke to find her daughter's bed hadn't been slept in. She rang around family and friends, hoping Brandy had slept with them, but nobody had seen or heard from her. Panicked, Ellen contacted the Longview Police Department, but they were less than cooperative. As Brandy was 23 years old and had gone to the nightclub voluntarily, they surmised that she'd probably gone home with someone or was at a friend's house. Several days would pass before the Longview Police Department took Brandy's case seriously, by which time it may have been too late. 5 days after Brandy disappeared, police found her car abandoned off Interstate 20 at Texas Highway 31 outside of Longview. Inside the car, police found her wallet, purse, and a broken mobile phone. Bizarrely, the driver's seat had been pushed far back. Brandy stood at just 4'11" or 5 foot, and so she had the driver's seat sat as far forward as possible. Inside the trunk, investigators also found a plastic gas can, which Ellen could not confirm belonged to her daughter. Investigators speculated that someone had in fact helped Brandy that evening, but had that person been responsible for her disappearance? Shortly after Brandy's disappearance was taken seriously and her car was found, investigators also came across a vital clue at Graham Central Station. CCTV footage from the night Brandy disappeared showed a woman matching her description talking to 2 unidentified men. Brandy's family were asked to view the footage, but her mother Ellen didn't believe it was her. Despite numerous appeals, nobody came forward to identify the 2 men in the footage, with the woman who looked like Brandy. This lead quickly went cold, but as one door closed, another opened. Investigators also discovered that Brandy's phone had been active in the hours or days after she had disappeared. They were able to track down the phone, which led them to 3 men, who claimed that they found Brandy's phone in Longview. Not only had they found the phone, but they claimed to have been the ones who used it after August 3rd. According to reports, all 3 men were subjected to polygraph examinations and one of them failed. The Longview Police Department have stated that these 3 men are no longer suspects in Brandy's case. The man who failed the lie detector test was later ruled out following extensive interviews. The only other possible clue came in 2009, when Ellen received a disturbing call from a man calling himself Tim. He told Ellen that Brandy was living in Kansas City, Missouri, but refused to elaborate before disconnecting the call. Several shows and articles have been written about Brandy's disappearance, but the Longview Police Department are still no closer to unraveling the truth. Brandy Ellen Wells is described as a white female with brown hair, brown eyes, 4'11" to 5 foot, and 120 to 130 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Longview Police Department at 903-237-1199, quoting case number 06001-7233. Chester is among one of the more beautiful cities that England has to offer, and it was here where the Corriam family settled. On March 11, 1987, the Corriams welcomed their daughter Rebecca into the world. Another girl would follow shortly after, and according to reports, the Corriams also fostered 2 boys. The Corriams would live in Chester as a unit, and by all accounts, they were a normal and loving family. Rebecca was regarded as a bright and intelligent young woman who was extremely friendly. After finishing secondary school, Rebecca decided to spread her wings and opted to study for her degree at Plymouth University, Exeter, over 290 miles from home. Rebecca would get her degree with flying colors, but was always looking for something else to sink her teeth into. Her love of children and bubbly, outgoing personality made her the perfect mentor. According to reports, Rebecca spent time at Camp America, where she connected with dozens of children and learned many valuable skills. Upon returning home, Rebecca saw an advertisement for the Disney Wonder, a Disney cruise ship that sailed the Panama Canal. The job posting stated that they were looking for friendly, enthusiastic people to join their crew, to look after guests and make their experience special. Rebecca immediately felt this was a position she would excel at, given her friendly disposition. She was also drawn in by the chance to travel around the US and other parts of the world, all while getting paid for it. In 2010, she attended a round of interviews, and after many days of waiting, she got the call she'd been waiting for. She'd been chosen to become a crew member and would be departing soon. Rebecca's first few months at sea were nothing short of a dream. Despite the time difference, Rebecca regularly Skyped with her family and would leave them messages and emails. Her family noticed the new glow about her and how much fun she seemed to be having, but then tragedy struck. 4 months into her new job, her grandfather passed away, and she was granted 2 weeks compensation leave, during which time she traveled back to England to attend the funeral. Once her leave was up, Rebecca boarded a plane and headed for Los Angeles in early January of 2011. The flight was smooth and Rebecca was back on board the Disney Wonder. Her fellow crew members were excited to have her back on board as they'd missed her cheery smile. For 6 weeks, business would continue as normal. But then, on March 22, 2011, something bizarre happened. According to Rebecca's parents, she contacted them on March 21, 2011, telling them that the cruise was due to start a new cycle the following day, and that she would be in touch soon. This was the last time Rebecca was ever heard from again. It's presumed that Rebecca headed to bed as normal that evening, but on March 22nd, she failed to show up for her shift. Her managers presumed that she'd taken unwell in the night and headed to her cabin, but she was nowhere to be found. A search of the ship was quickly conducted, but nobody had seen or heard from Rebecca since the night before. Panicked, her managers quickly scrambled for the CCTV camera footage, as they knew cameras covered almost every angle of the ship. To their delight, at 5:45 a.m., Rebecca was caught on CCTV on a deck. In the footage, Rebecca appears distraught, as if something's bothering her, or as if she'd been in an argument. After disconnecting the call, Rebecca walked out of view of the cameras and was never spotted again. Rebecca's family in England were notified of her disappearance, but being thousands of miles away, they felt powerless. The Disney Wonder did call in reinforcements and brought in search teams to scour the waters they'd gone through in the night. According to these search teams, one of which was the US Coast Guard, no sign of Rebecca was found in the water. Rebecca's family and friends were deeply troubled by her disappearance. How could someone simply disappear from a cruise ship? In the wake of Rebecca's disappearance, there have been rumors that Disney and the Disney Wonder tried to suppress information about Rebecca's case, as they feared it would tarnish their reputation and scare away customers. There are an abundance of theories in Rebecca's case, and there have been dozens upon dozens of possible sightings and supposed sightings. There's also been a string of salacious news articles published in the wake of Rebecca's disappearance, but none of these theories hold any significant weight. Investigators remain clueless as to how Rebecca could simply disappear from a cruise ship that was at sea and not docked. Rebecca's family and friends hold their own theories, but until new evidence comes to light, it's unlikely we'll ever know the truth. A quick internet search will provide you with hundreds, if not thousands of videos claiming to have captured poltergeist activity in someone's home, office, or in abandoned buildings that are purported to be haunted. But many of these videos have been faked and show nothing more than a few simple tricks that make objects seemingly move on their own. And yet many people are fooled into thinking that they're real. One case that took place in 1940, though, was witnessed by more than 100 firefighters and onlookers, and it's still not been explained today. The case of the Odin fires is one that may never be solved. It all started on the 21st of June of that year in a farmhouse in the town of Odin, Indiana, which was owned by the Hackler family, which had 5 members. It seemed a normal day just like any other, but when the family's oldest son stated that he could smell smoke, little did they know that they were in for an ordeal that they would never forget. It soon became apparent that a fire had broken out in the house, something that could spell disaster for the family if it wasn't contained quickly, and so they sprang into action to find the source. But when they did so, they were left baffled as they discovered that a solitary strip of wallpaper was on fire without explanation. The bedroom was completely empty at the time, and so it was assumed that the fire must have started inside the wall. But this wasn't very likely, since the house had not been fitted with electricity, and the only plausible explanation that anyone can think of was that a chimney once existed in that space, and that it had been covered up by renovations that left it faulty. The local fire department was called to do an investigation, and they decided that it would be best to open the wall up to expose the problematic chimney. But when they did so, they found that not only was there no chimney, but there were no signs that a fire had broken out. This caused great confusion among the family and the firefighters, but with nothing further to be done, they left it at that and chalked it up as an unexplained event. Little did they know that this was only the beginning of the strange activity that would occur in the house that day. The firefighters left the house, but as soon as they made it back to town, they were informed that they needed to return to the farm, since, quite unbelievably, another strange fire had broken out. This time, it was Mrs. Hackler who discovered it inexplicably smoldering inside a mattress in one of the other empty bedrooms. The fire was put out, but as soon as this was done, another started in another part of the house. Each of the fires was stranger than the last, and unlike the first one, the firefighters were on hand to witness these bizarre events as they unfolded. Mr. Hackler had left some clothes of his hanging on the back of his and Mrs. Hackler's bedroom door, and this seemed to spontaneously combust, even though no one was in the area at the time. The fires started to pop up so quickly that the firefighters were struggling to keep up, and eventually they knew they had to call for assistance. A fire brigade from one town over was summoned, resulting in over 100 men struggling against the inexplicable blazes that seemed to show no sign of letting up. As if the fire inside the wall and on Mr. Hackler's clothing wasn't strange enough, one of the firefighters drew his colleague's attention to a book that was lying on a shelf. He noticed that it seemed to be smoking, and when he opened it up to investigate, he found it was smoldering and that some of the pages had been burnt to a crisp. Soon enough, even the reinforced attempts of the firefighters weren't enough to contain the blazes inside the 2-story farmhouse, and the Hackler's neighbors arrived to try and lend a hand before the house could be razed to cinders. They would later recall standing in a room with 2 other people when the curtains suddenly burst into flames, and they had to scramble to stop it from spreading through the room and the rest of the house. But as they started dousing the curtains with water, another set on the other side of the room abruptly went up in flames. But strangely, they realized that the fires never spread to any surrounding walls, window shades, or furniture, but rather stayed localized to the single item that was burning, which left them perplexed to say the least. One of the witnesses who was present that day would later state that it felt as if some unseen hand was setting fires as soon as no one was around while they were tending to all the other blazes that had broken out. As the ordeal continued, everyone present attempted to find a logical explanation for what was happening, and it was suggested that there might be power lines too close to the house, but this simply wasn't the case. Others suggested that the fires could have been caused by lightning strikes, but since it was a beautiful sunny day in June, this was also quickly ruled out. When all was said and done, a total of 28 fires had broken out in the family's house through the course of a day. They had all been extinguished, but none had been explained. The last fire that was put out was at around 11 p.m., but the family no doubt would have had a hard time getting a good night's sleep after the strange events that unfolded during the day, as they decided to move their beds outside, just in case another fire broke out while they were sleeping. The Indiana State Fire Marshal was interviewed about the inexplicable fires later on, and he stated he had no explanation for what had happened, as it was the strangest case he had ever heard or dealt with in his long career. Many people in the area recalled that previously 2 families who lived in the house had been struck by tragedy. The first was also a family of 5 that was stricken by the burning fever, and several of those family members passed away. When another family moved into the house later, they lost 2 sons on 2 separate hunting accidents, and there were suggestions that the house was cursed or haunted by a dangerous poltergeist. Mr. Heckler decided to demolish the house, but he used the same bricks to rebuild it just a short distance away, and the family encountered no further strange activity. It was suggested that this was all a hoax, but it would be a bit drastic to tear down a house just to fool a few people in town, and the mystery of the Odin fires remains unexplained to this day. Stephenville, Texas has become known as a hotspot for UFO sightings, as many people have reported seeing strange lights in the sky, and on occasion, even having encounters with strange beings that they couldn't identify. On the 8th of January, 2008, for example, more than 50 calls were made to the Mutual UFO Network by people who claimed to have seen a UFO that they estimated to measure more than a mile wide. They added that it flew close to the ground and at high speed, with bright lights that could be seen for miles. One hunter reported seeing the object while he was out in the woods, while another man was camping with his friends when they spotted the same object, and became convinced that it was not of this world. The sightings were dismissed by the military as an optical illusion that was created by the sun reflecting off 2 airliners that were flying overhead. But most of the witnesses that came forward have stated that this simply wasn't the case. This is just one of many strange incidents that have occurred in Stephenville over the years. But one case in particular is even more terrifying than the rest, as a woman claims to have been abducted by strange creatures in March of 1980. The woman, who's chosen to remain anonymous, made sure to explain that she's never taken any illegal substances, and at the time of the abduction had not been drinking alcohol and wasn't on any type of medication. She starts her account by saying that she had just gotten home from one of her 2 jobs at around noon on a Friday afternoon. She'd been laid off from work a few months earlier and was still feeling upset about it, and hence she'd been crying and praying after she got home. She eventually decided to have something to eat and sat down at her kitchen table to do so, but she then became aware of the strange sensation that she was being watched, though this seemed impossible since she felt like someone was looking at her from her ceiling. She then spoke to her husband over the phone for a short while before lying down on her couch, but she couldn't get her money troubles out of her mind, so she decided to get up at around 1:15 p.m. She intended to do the dishes, but as she got up off the couch, she became aware of a strange sensation, as if some unseen force was tugging at her. She was forced back onto the couch, and no matter how much she struggled, it had no effect. A few moments later, everything around her went black, and she could hear a strange sound similar to that of a power drill. She suddenly realized that she was no longer in her house, and that there was a strange man with her. She struggled to get free, but stated that the man had some device that seemed to take her breath out of her lungs, and before long she lost consciousness once more. When she started to come to again, she could hear two male voices conversing with one another, saying that it was not her time yet, while the others said that they merely wanted to talk to her. When her vision had returned, she noted that the two men seemed human, but she has no memory of their faces. She then told them that she was worried that her children would come home from school to find that she wasn't there, but one of the men stated that she would be back in her house before the kids got home. In a soft and calm voice, he told her that she would be getting divorced soon and that she would be going through an emotionally tough time, but added that her children would be fine. She then told him that she didn't think she could handle all of that, but the man assured her that she would be okay in the end. She was then moved into a round room where other people who had been taken from their homes were seated. She noted that some of them were afraid, but others seemed eerily quiet. One man sitting perfectly still with tears welling up in his eyes. Once all the seats in the room were filled, she became aware that they were moving, and before long, they arrived at a building that reminded her of an airport terminal. And here, she saw several people observing the abductees, even aiding those who were becoming anxious. She was then taken to a room where she were to lay down beneath a strange machine. Someone started asking her questions that made her think she was undergoing a character test, and when that was over, she took a shower and was given a black dress and black high-heeled shoes to wear. Next, she was led to what she describes as a beauty salon, and here she tried to get more information about where she was and who these people were, but she was told that this couldn't be discussed at the time. Following this, she was taken to a room where a man who had also been abducted was waiting, and he stated that she should just play along, though he also had no idea what they were doing there. She was then led to yet another room where a device was implanted behind one of her ears. She was told that this was for communication and tracking purposes, and that she and her partner man had been specifically chosen. She assumed they were referring to the man that she met in the previous room, and was then told that she wouldn't remember any of the events that occurred, but if she did, that no one would believe her. She was then led onto a craft where she met up with her quote partner man, who hugged her and stated that he would find her again. A moment later, she awoke on her couch and noted that 2 hours had passed. A few days later, she had to seek medical attention as she kept having dizzy spells, and her doctor found that she had an ear infection. She tried to explain what had happened to her, but no one believed her and thought that she may be going through an emotional breakdown. After suffering from bouts of depression, she would eventually get divorced 7 years after the incident and wanted nothing more than to find the man that she'd been partnered with on the strange craft, though she's not seen him since. The woman is unsure whether her abductors were human or not, but she is certain that she was taken to a facility in Colorado for reasons that are still unknown to her. She stated that although she's still uncertain of what exactly happened to her, she feels honored to have been chosen and hopes to meet her partner man again one day. History is littered with strange coincidences that seem almost too unbelievable to be true. One example of this is when a yacht named the Mignonette ran afoul of a storm in the Indian Ocean and sank in July of 1884. The crew managed to make it to land in a lifeboat, but with no time to save any of their provisions, they resorted to eating a tortoise and ultimately one of their own crew, a man named Richard Parker. Quite unbelievably, author Edgar Allan Poe had written a story called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, 46 years earlier, and in the tale, crew members on board a ship find themselves in trouble when their ship is damaged. They would ultimately end up eating a tortoise and, after drawing straws, in the life of a man named Richard Parker, just as it had happened when the Mignonette sank decades later. Another strange coincidence took place during World War I, when a German ship was painted the same colors as British merchant ships in hopes that it would be well disguised, since it looked remarkably like a ship called the HMS Carmania. But on the 14th of September, 1914, the disguised ship would come face to face with the actual HMS Carmania, which had now been painted gray, and the German ship was scuttled after a long and ferocious battle. But there is one coincidence that many people consider to be a modern-day miracle, as it involves members of a church choir that by all accounts should have all lost their lives, but somehow managed to avoid tragedy. All in all, the choir was made up of 15 members, all of whom were known for their punctuality, since the very strict Reverend Klempo of the West Side Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska didn't take kindly to latecomers. It was Wednesday, the 1st of March, 1950, when a choir practice had been scheduled for 7:25 p.m. Klemple traveled to the church ahead of time to light the furnaces to ensure that the choir members were comfortable when they arrived. By 4:15 p.m., the furnaces were lit and the church started to warm up. With his chore done, the Reverend returned to his house to have dinner before the start of the choir practice, but little did he know that it would be a very eventful evening. The Reverend would be accompanied by his wife and young daughter that evening, but as they were getting ready, they noticed that the girl had soiled her dress. They had no choice but to iron another, leaving them running late, which was very uncharacteristic. The choir director, Mrs. Paul, was also running late thanks to her daughter Marilyn, who was also the church's pianist. She had decided to take a nap before choir practice and struggled to wake up when her mother tried to rouse her. By the time she was fully awake, it was already 7:15 p.m., and they knew they wouldn't reach the church in time for the start of practice. But nevertheless, they got ready as fast as possible and headed out the door. Another choir member, Herbert Kiff, had spent some time that afternoon writing an important letter to denomination headquarters, and by the time he was supposed to leave for the church, he wasn't quite done. He chose to spend a few extra minutes completing the letter before he felt comfortable with its contents. He then decided that he would mail it while making his way to practice, but realized that he too wouldn't make it to the church in time. Also running late were Royanna Estes and her sister, who would have been at the church at the normal time if it weren't for the fact that they were having car trouble. They decided to call a fellow choir member, LaDonna Vandergift, a high school sophomore, for a ride, but she was having trouble with her geometry homework and wanted to finish before making her way to the church. And so all three of the women were behind schedule. Lucille Jones and Dorothy Wood, two high school students, were engrossed in a radio show about then-renowned ventriloquist Edgar Bergen. When they were supposed to leave for practice, the show wasn't done yet, and Lucille decided to listen to the end before leaving the house, even though it would mean they would be tardy. A man named Harvey All was running late because he also lost track of time while having a conversation with his two sons. Mrs. Leonard Schuster was on her way to the church already but had to stop off at her mother's home to help her get ready for a missionary meeting, causing her to run behind schedule. Fellow choir member Joyce Black stated that she had no excuse for being late that day, as she was simply feeling lazy thanks to the day's weather, and she waited as long as she could before setting off to the church. Quite unbelievably, every single member of the choir was running late, but still doing their best to get to the church as soon as possible. But it would turn out that these coincidences likely saved all of their lives. At 7:25 p.m. that evening, when choir practice should have been getting underway, the entire town heard a massive bang and felt shockwaves coming from the direction of the church. Some of the houses surrounding the church had their windows destroyed, while lights went out all over town thanks to the explosion. A local radio station had to stop broadcasting thanks to the massive blast that would then be determined to have occurred at the church, which was now nothing more than cinders and ash, as it was leveled by the explosion. After a thorough investigation was carried out, it was found that a natural gas leak had been building up inside the building, and this was then ignited by the furnaces which had been lit earlier that day by Reverend Klemple. While many people suggested that this was merely a strange case of several coincidences occurring at the same time, others were sure that this was divine intervention, and that all 15 members of the choir thereafter, nicknamed the Lucky 15, had been saved from a terrible fate. All 15 of the choir members stated that they believed God saved them that day, and that they were all fated to be late since they were all in different areas of the town at the time of the explosion, and the fact that they all usually arrived early to avoid being told off by Klemple. It's a strange tale that's still spoken about today, and although many theories have been put forward to explain this unbelievable event, no one can say for certain whether this was fate or just a series of completely unrelated coincidences that happened to save the lives of 15 people. Not much is known about a man named John Baptiste who lived in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1862, but some records show that he was born in Ireland in 1813. But this has been refuted by some people who knew him well in Castlemaine, Australia, as they stated that he couldn't speak English as well as an Irishman would, and that he actually hailed from Italy. Then there are those who met him in Salt Lake City who thought that he was from France due to his accent. But it's certain that he was in Australia until 1855, after which he traveled to the United States by ship. He arrived in Honolulu on the 5th of July, 1855, from where he made his way to San Francisco, arriving there in February of the following year. He spent a few years here and then decided to relocate to Salt Lake City, where he built a small house close to the cemetery and became his ward's choir leader. He married a woman named Dorothy Jennison, and all seemed to be going well for Baptiste, who worked as a gravedigger at the cemetery, until it was discovered that he was busy with some truly macabre dealings. It all started to unravel for Baptiste when two men were accused of assaulting Governor John Dawson. Both men, one of whom was called Moroni Clausen, lost their lives at the hands of the police, and although his accomplice was buried normally, no one claimed Clausen's remains. A local police officer named Henry Heath decided to pay for Clausen's funeral and even went as far as to pay for his burial suit before he was laid to rest. Soon enough, Clausen's family received word that he had been killed, and so they traveled to Salt Lake City to claim his body and give him a proper burial in Draper, Utah. This meant that Clausen's grave had to be exhumed, and when this was done, his family was shocked to find that he was positioned face down in his coffin and that he wasn't wearing any clothes. Naturally, they were outraged and demanded an explanation for his improper burial. The police assured them that he'd been buried in a suit and in normal fashion, with Heath coming forward to explain that he'd even paid for Clausen's burial attire. This brought them little comfort though, and they demanded an explanation. The first logical place to start was to speak to Baptiste, since he was the one who had dug and covered up Clausen's grave, and so the family and Officer Heath made their way to his house to look for answers. Upon their arrival there, they were greeted by his wife Dorothy, who explained that he wasn't home at the time since he was hard at work in the cemetery. Still outraged, Clausen's family pushed her for answers that she didn't have, but they noticed something strange in the couple's living room. Several boxes were stacked on top of each other, and each one seemed to have pieces of clothing sticking out. They decided to investigate further and, to their shock and horror, realized that the clothing belonged to people who had been buried in the cemetery. This brought the sudden realization to Heath's mind that his daughter had been buried in the same cemetery 9 months earlier, and he immediately raced to the site where Baptiste was busy digging. He demanded answers, and Baptiste immediately confessed to being a grave robber, begging for his life to be spared. Heath had, on his way to the site, decided that if Baptiste confessed to disturbing his daughter's grave, he would end his life on the spot. But Baptiste revealed that this wasn't the case. He did, however, point out all the other graves that he had robbed, of which there were many, more than 300, and he was immediately arrested. The boxes were removed from his house and were found to contain not only clothing and shoes, but other items that his victims had been buried with. Since there were so many items discovered in the house, they were kept at the Salt Lake City courthouse, where family members of people who had been buried in the cemetery could view them and identify any items that belonged to their loved ones. The unclaimed items were all gathered into one big pile and eventually buried in a single grave in the city's cemetery. Many people called for the grave robber to be executed or to be sent to prison for life due to the macabre nature of his crime, but things would then take an unexpected turn. While still imprisoned, a lynch mob formed outside, calling for the grave robber to be killed. Things inside the prison weren't going any better as Baptiste's fellow inmates started threatening to take his life. Religious leader and politician Brigham Young stated that execution and life imprisonment would be too lenient a punishment for the crimes that Baptiste had committed, and he suggested that he be exiled for life, which was then agreed upon. In 1862, Baptiste would be brought to Antelope Island and from there taken to Fremont Island in the Great Salt Lake, which was the property of the Miller family, and here he was slated to live out the remainder of his days. He was given a small shack with only basic supplies to live on, and would live on the island alone, save for the cattle that were owned by the Millers. Two of the family's sons would make the trip to the island every 3 weeks to check on the animals, and upon doing so for the first time after Baptiste's arrival, they reported that he had used a lot of food that had been left for him, but that he was alive and well. It would then be a further 6 weeks before their next visit, and when they arrived on the island, they discovered that Baptiste was no longer there. They reported that a section of the shack was missing, and that one of the older cows had been slaughtered, its hide having been cut into strips. The only explanation they could come up with was that Baptiste had used wood from the shack and the leather strips to construct a makeshift raft, which he then used to escape the island, though this has never been proven, as Baptiste was never seen or heard from again. It was believed that Baptiste's remains were found on the island in 1890, but the skeleton that was found had a ball and chain around one of its ankles, which Baptiste did not. Some people were adamant that this was the grave robber, and soon rumors started to spread that his spirit was haunting the island, with some people stating that they had seen his ghost wandering there. The truth is, though, that no one ever found out what happened to the exiled prisoner, and to this day, no one has any idea where he went or what became of him after he allegedly escaped from Fremont Island. Few places in the world can be as creepy and mysterious as the woods, many of which are reported to be haunted by the spirits of those who perished while traveling through them, as anyone who spent time around a midnight campfire will attest to. But there is one stretch of woods in Matthews County, Virginia, that's considered by many to be the most haunted in all of the United States, as it's been the site of many strange events throughout the last few centuries. The 50-acre Old House Woods is situated just north of Gloucester in the small town of Diggs, and it's here that people have had some truly unnerving experiences. These are all made the more frightening by the fact that the woods are extremely dark thanks to the thick branches overhead, and that often they completely block out the sky. Thanks to this convenient cover, it's been the site for many criminals to hide out from the law. But it hasn't just been used by unsavory characters, as it also served Revolutionary as well as Civil War soldiers as a secret port. The Old House Woods were so named thanks to an old colonial house called the Franny Knight House that used to be situated at its center during the 1700s. The house is said to, on one occasion, have suddenly burst into flames with no explanation, only for the flames to be extinguished by an unseen force. It would burst into flames again a few years later, and this time it was razed to the ground with no part of it left to be seen. But this was just the first of a series of inexplicable events that would then take place in the mysterious woods in the years to come. Sometime in the 1800s, a fisherman named Ben Farabee would report that he had an encounter while out at sea that left him shaken and completely baffled. He spotted a three-masted ship out on the water, and to his shock, it seemed to be headed directly for his fishing boat. He noted that the ship had lit lanterns on board and that the crew seemed ghostly as it approached. He yelled a warning at the top of his lungs, but it had no effect, and the ship continued on its course with the collision imminent. He braced for the impact, certain that he would end up in the cold water, but when there was none, he looked up and saw the ship floating above his head, seemingly unaware of his presence. He watched in disbelief as the ghost ship sailed on towards the coastline, becoming aware of the eerie sound of a harp being played. The ship then sailed above the trees of Old House Woods before suddenly coming to a stop. He then saw the crew lowering rope ladders from the deck and witnessed the ghostly crew climb over the side before vanishing among the trees, carrying tools and items that he wasn't able to identify. Many other people have reported seeing a similar ship floating about 50 feet above the ocean's waves, and that it's usually accompanied by a strange ghostly fog that partially obscures it from view. This may have something to do with another well-known legend, which states that a band of pirates decided to bury their ill-gotten loot somewhere along the woods' banks. But as they were in the process of doing so, a massive storm suddenly rolled in and washed the men out to sea, where they lost their lives. Some people believe that these same pirate spirits return to the woods on occasion to look for their buried treasure, and that this is what Farabee must have seen. But this isn't the only lost treasure that's rumored to be in the Old House Woods. It's said that in 1651, King Charles II owned a treasure ship that was traveling from England to America during the Battle of Worcester. The king had made provision in case he was forced out of England, and so ordered that the ship sail to Jamestown, where he would likely start a new life if needed. But the ship never reached its intended destination, as it was blown off course by a violent storm, forcing it to land in White Creek, where it was quickly plundered by a group of bandits. All of the treasure aboard the ship was then moved into Old House Woods, but was never retrieved, as some of the bandits were apparently arrested or lost their lives before they could do so. This has given rise to many rumors, with some people claiming to see the ship's original crew trying to protect the treasure, while others report seeing the bandits as they attempt to retrieve it from the ground under a strange green glow of lantern light. There have also been sightings of the spirits of British soldiers, who also carry lanterns while they dig in the ground in different parts of the mysterious woods. It's said that they're looking for gold that belonged to General Charles Cornwallis, who ordered it to be buried there, but was unable to retrieve it as his men were all arrested before they could reveal the gold's exact location. Then there's the ghost known as the Storm Woman, a banshee-like spirit that seems to send out a warning, rather than looking to terrify anyone who comes across her path. Witnesses have described seeing the woman dressed in a white gown and emitting a strange green glow. When she's seen, she starts to float above the trees and lets out an earth-shattering shriek that's said to be a foreboding warning to any sailors in the area that a storm is about to roll in, and that they need to make their way back to land. But the woods aren't said to be haunted by human spirits alone. Many people have seen a pair of black horses wandering through the trees, which, upon being spotted, will suddenly attack anyone nearby. There have also been reports of phantom dogs that lurch out at people in the woods, and some motorists have reported that these dogs will jump into their cars, leaving claw marks behind before they inexplicably disappear into the darkness. One of the best known tales from Old House Woods concerns a duck hunter named Henry Forrest, who returned to town one day as pale as death. When asked what frightened him so badly, he stated that he saw black shapes on the water, and thinking that they were ducks, readied his rifle to shoot. But before he could do so, the shapes suddenly shifted into the spirits of British redcoat soldiers, and he had no choice but to flee back to his boat in terror. When he arrived there, though, he came face to face with another one of the spirits, and when he tried to fire at it, found that the trigger wouldn't move. He was forced to throw his rifle at the apparition and flee back to the safety of Diggs, where he recounted his terrifying ordeal. There are many more tales of paranormal activity in these woods, and many residents of Diggs refuse to step foot inside its tree line. Almost 55 years ago, visitors to the Oratory of St. Lawrence in Palermo, Italy, were shocked to discover an empty frame hanging above the altar where once a 300-year-old painting had been hung. Since then, rumors of mafia involvement and various theories about what happened to the painting have been spread. But what exactly happened and where the painting is now is a mystery. The painting in question was Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence. It was painted in 1609 by Caravaggio. The artist lived an interesting life that mixed high art with dark crimes, which led to him fleeing to Sicily to seek a papal pardon for a dark crime. Even the end of his life is shrouded in mystery, and he may have been the victim of a crime himself. The Nativity painting was created in the year before he passed away, during a period when Caravaggio was recovering from a fight in Naples. It's typical of his work, with most of the painting being made up of relatively dark colors, while lighting causes the faces of the central figures to glow. At some point in its history, the painting ended up in the Oratory of St. Lawrence, a Baroque religious building in Palermo, which was built in 1569. The oratory had connections to St. Francis, with stucco decorations depicting the life and deeds of the saint. With the importance of the two saints to this church, the Nativity with St. Francis and St. Lawrence was a fighting piece of decoration. It hung above the altar, surrounded on both sides by delicate statues and lit by windows that lined both walls of the oratory. When the last visitors left the building on October 17, 1969, they had no idea they would be the last people to see this historical painting, or at least the last people without any connection to the crime. According to reports, the weather was stormy that night, which would have given the thieves the perfect cover when they broke into the building. There are a few details about the crime itself, such as how they managed to get into the building, and there's only speculation about what exactly happened that night. Most investigators believe that at least 2 individuals were involved. They used a blade of some kind to carefully cut the painting away from its frame. The painting was 2.7 meters high and 2 meters wide, so it would have taken a considerable amount of time for the work to be done, and the criminals likely would have had to bring a ladder with them. According to later investigators, the work was so precisely done that there wasn't a speck of paint left behind. The criminals also cut up some of the carpet from the floor, and it's believed that this was used to roll the painting up. They then fled into the night, leaving behind no clues that could help investigators identify them. The investigation into the disappearance began immediately. Despite there being no clues to point to the identity of the thieves, investigators had a group of suspects early on. Palermo is the capital of Sicily and has been the scene of some of the most famous events in the history of Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia. Just a few years before the Nativity was stolen, the First Mafia War took place, with many of the fights between different clans taking place in Palermo. This then led to a period of inactivity in the Cosa Nostra, but the clans were still in existence. Many members were looking for ways to raise money for legal fees or to get better deals with authorities during a crackdown on organized crime. As well as there being motives for some mafia bosses to steal the painting, worth an estimated $20 million, there was also the belief that most high-profile crimes in the area were connected to a mafia clan in some way or another. The theory that this theft was also connected to some mafia member wasn't too unbelievable. There was a hope that the crackdown on organized crime would eventually lead to the painting's recovery. There have been a few instances in Italian history where paintings have been ransomed back to the owners in return for lenient sentences against high-ranking mafia members, or even those investigations being dropped. It was hoped that the Nativity would resurface this way, or otherwise the person that currently held the artwork would be caught for some other crime and the painting would be recovered. But as more and more people were captured and the painting didn't resurface, that hope slowly faded away. Still, the belief that the mafia had been in possession of the Nativity at some point remained. In Italy, there's a specific term for members of criminal organizations that decide to work with authorities to take down their former colleagues. These are pentiti, and many have given authorities information about the painting. A few of these pentiti have even claimed to have been responsible for stealing the painting themselves. They claim to have been ordered to do so by various mafia bosses, while others are claimed to have moved the Nativity from one place to another. Many of the stories given by these criminals contradict one another, and it's difficult for investigators to know which supposed confession to believe, and which is being given just for a lighter sentence or preferential treatment. For art lovers, a reoccurring story that the painting no longer exists is the most devastating and possibly the most believable. It's alleged that after the careful extraction from the frame, the Nativity was somehow damaged during the robbery. When it was delivered to the criminal who had ordered the theft, he was disappointed with it. It was then left wrapped in the carpet in an outbuilding and was eaten by rats or hogs. What remained was burned. Another story suggests that it was used as a doormat. A more hopeful story suggests that it was hung in a place of honor and was prized by the criminal that now owned it. In 2016, another story made headlines when a new pentiti came forward with information. He claimed that the painting had been delivered to the mafia boss, Gaetano Badalamenti, a powerful criminal who had headed the Sicilian Mafia Commission in the 1970s. Badalamenti took the painting to an art dealer in Switzerland who cried when the painting was produced. The dealer warned him that it would be impossible to sell the painting whole, and it should be cut up into pieces to sell it more discreetly. Badalamenti was imprisoned in 2002 for unrelated crimes and passed away 2 years later. The story led to renewed hope that the Nativity was still out there, albeit in multiple pieces, and could be found. An investigation was launched in 2017, but so far the painting hasn't been found. Almost 55 years later, it remains one of the most notorious, unsolved art mysteries in history, and has appeared on the FBI's list of top art crimes. The original Unsolved Mysteries TV show was best known for its creepy unsolved crimes and disappearances, as well as some supernatural and paranormal ones. But there are some cases that don't fit these molds. The case of George J. Stein is one such case. The first known appearance of George J. Stein was on November 12, 1936. He was an ordinary-looking man who opened a bank in Ripon, Wisconsin. It was a savings account, and he deposited $120. The Social Security Act in the U.S. had already been passed the year before, and the first numbers are being handed out in 1936, so it wasn't a surprise for the clerk that Stein didn't offer one to go with his account. He also didn't leave a home address, But this also wasn't enough to raise any suspicion. Stein deposited $120 into his savings account. Looking at the average wages for a white male in full-time work during that period, this would have been the equivalent of about a month's wages. If Stein was depositing his month's wages, he didn't choose to return to the bank that following month for the same purpose. He also didn't make any withdrawals during that time. The Ripon Bank wouldn't see or hear from Stein again. This was during the worst years of the Great Depression. People moved around the country looking for work as stable jobs were hard to find. Stein could have been one of the countless individuals who decided to leave the more populated areas in search of work and didn't come back. If this had just been one strange bank deposit, it likely wouldn't have received much attention outside the immediate area. Even though that would be a considerable amount of money today, or in 1989, when the case featured on Unsolved Mysteries, it wouldn't have been too strange for the account to have been abandoned. But the Ripon bank account was the first of many opened and immediately abandoned by this same mysterious individual. Wisconsin had the highest number of these accounts opened by Stein, with 5 in total being opened in various parts of the state. But Stein didn't limit his financial interest to one state. 3 savings accounts were opened in Indiana, 2 in Minnesota, 1 in Iowa, and 1 in Illinois. These bank accounts were all opened between the years of 1936 and 1952. An exact timeline of when these were opened hasn't been released. They could have been opened in clusters or evenly spread across the 16 years Stein was active. A bank in Texas believes Stein may have opened an account with them, but this is less certain. Stein didn't leave any personal identifying information at any of these bank accounts. It wouldn't be until 1970 that banks were required to collect Social Security numbers from their customers, and by 1952, it was still common for someone to go through life without having one. A few addresses were given, but only one led to a real place. When Stein opened a bank account in Indianapolis, he listed his home address as 505 Washington Street. In reality, this was the address of a company that made clothing accessories, such as hats and gloves. This may have just been a random address that Stein had no connection to. There are over 5,000 Washington streets in the US. It was a common enough street name that someone with no information about the city could guess that one likely existed, or at least it sounded like a real enough street name to not raise suspicions. But some believe that this could be the first clue to figuring out who he really was. A researcher looking into the case discovered that the company that was located at 505 Washington Street had traveling salespeople. When he gave a description of George J. Stein, he was informed that this matched the description of a salesman named Ralph Barnett. According to the company, Barnett's sales duties took him to the same places where Stein opened bank accounts. One explanation for this mystery is that Barnett, for whatever reason, decided to use a fake name to open bank accounts in these areas when he'd earned large sums of money. It would be safer than transporting the cash, especially in an area that he might not have been too familiar with. This theory suggests that Barnett passed away on the job before collecting the money. But that doesn't explain why, over the course of 16 years during a financial crisis, he didn't withdraw funds from these bank accounts. If he'd placed it in the bank for safekeeping until he could move it to his regular account, he would have made the transfer relatively quickly. The Washington Street address wasn't the only piece of information researchers used to try to get to the bottom of this mystery. At one point, Stein wrote a return address on an envelope used to deposit money. This address was presumably not real, but the name attached to it was. This was Ed Fay, a man who was on the run from police. Fay was part of a gang that robbed banks in the very early 1900s. In 1903, he was arrested after his gang stole $15,000 in stamps and cash from a post office in Superior, Wisconsin. He was put in prison but escaped in 1904. The fugitive was never caught, and what happened to him after he escaped jail remains a mystery. According to one researcher looking into the case, Fay would have been roughly the same age as Stein during the period when Stein was making deposits. The theory that Stein was Fay has a few problems. If Fay had changed his name to Stein and worked a regular job, there would have been some record of him somewhere, and people would have been able to identify him. If he'd been depositing money to have access to later, The same questions as those from the Barnett explanation need to be answered. On top of this, it seems strange that a fugitive who's been on the run for over 30 years would decide to use his own name on an envelope. It seems more likely that this was some kind of joke for Stein, and the name was as fake as the address that it was attached to. When the Unsolved Mysteries episode aired in 1989, the goal was to try to locate the heirs of George J. Stein. Assuming Fay was an adult when he was part of the robbery gang, and Stein was roughly the same age, it's almost certain that Stein was no longer alive at this point. It's possible that the individual making these deposits passed away shortly after his last deposit in 1952, but his heirs would have been eligible to claim that money. A few people had come forward claiming to be a relative of George Stein to claim what was then worth about $130,000, but none of them could confirm the identity of the account holder. Today, that money has likely been surrendered to the state, and solving the mystery of George J. Stein's identity is more of a matter of curiosity than something that would have a consequence. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York is one of the biggest art museums in the world. Founded in 1870, it's been visited by millions of visitors who have come to see artwork from all over the world. During that time, there have been surprisingly few heists or even attempted robberies. Today, it's more likely that you'll hear about the Met having been the recipient of stolen artwork than having its own artwork stolen. But in the 1970s and 80s, there were a few robberies, and one that's never been solved. The story resembles something from a Hollywood film. In 1976, the Treasures of Tut exhibit came to the Met Museum, with its scheduled end in September of 1979. In that time, over 1 million people came to the museum, specifically to visit this exhibit, and the museum actually extended its opening hours to allow for the increased capacity. Even in February of 1979, the museum was still packed with visitors. While most would spend time looking at the ancient Egyptian artifacts, they would also wander around the other areas of the museum to look at artifacts from other cultures. The Cypriot Gallery corridor would have been another relatively popular area. Greek and Roman art from the Neolithic period right up until the 4th century could be viewed and admired. At 3:15 p.m. on February 10, 1979, nothing seemed out of the ordinary in the Cypriot Gallery or anywhere else in the museum for that matter. The security guard changed shifts at this point, and 10 minutes later, the new guard walked down the same gallery to notice something very out of place. There was a wooden pedestal that didn't have anything displayed on it. The museum immediately went on high alert. Anyone familiar with the gallery would have known what was missing. It was a herm head from classical Greece. This piece was an almost life-size statue of a man with wavy hair and a beard. It had damage to its nose, but was otherwise in good condition. It was believed to have been made sometime in the 3rd century BC. Herms were common enough in ancient Greece. The most elaborate, like the one in the Met Museum, were depictions of the god of Hermes on a pillar. These were boundary markers and significant to the god Hermes due to his role as the guardian of roads and doorways. Ironically, Hermes was also the god of thieves, and that was likely what the museum was now worried about. There was a possibility that it had simply been misplaced. There was no reason why a museum staff member would have moved the statue from this part of the museum to another, but there was faint hope that this would be quickly resolved. While some staff members checked to make sure that this wasn't the case, everyone leaving the museum was checked for the statue. The head was almost 10 inches high and 8 inches deep and weighed about 20 pounds. It would be difficult to smuggle out of the museum unnoticed. All bags and packages exiting the museum were checked. Even areas like the kitchen were inspected to ensure it hadn't traveled through there. Despite the quick action, the thief had managed to get away. They had apparently managed to pull the statue from its pedestal and escape in the 10 minutes it took for the guards to change, all without being noticed by any of the visitors. The news of the robbery appeared on the front page of the New York Times the following day. According to the report, this was the first major theft in the Met's history. It spent $3 million a year on security to ensure that this didn't happen. The person who took the statue likely knew those security measures. In 1979, the advanced CCTV we have today wasn't available, and the guards on duty would have been the hardest security measure the thief had to overcome. It wouldn't have been hard for the thief to monitor the guard schedules and figure out how long they would have to snatch the pieces of art. Alternatively, it could have been a very lucky, opportunistic thief who saw that there was no guard and decided to take the risk. With the theft being on the front page of the paper, it would have been difficult for the thief to move the artwork on unless they had a buyer ready already. The museum had bought the piece in the 1950s from a private collector for just $15,000, but estimated that it was worth $150,000. Other art dealers claimed that it could fetch as much as $300,000 if the museum decided to sell it. It's unlikely the thief would get that much for it though. It would have been too hot to handle, as the FBI and NYC Police Department were already on the case. It's not known how many clues the police were able to gather. A few days after the heist, security guards at the Rockefeller Center received a strange call. It was 8:42 p.m. on Valentine's Day, and the caller didn't provide much information. They simply said that if the police were still looking for the missing artifact, it was in locker number 5514 at Grand Central Terminal. The security guards contacted the police, who rushed to the train station lockers. They needed to use a pocket knife to break into the locker, but when they eventually got it open, they found that the tip had been genuine. The harem head had been stored in the locker with a white sheet over it. The locker was dusted for prints, but there was little that the forensic team could get from the statue itself. The material meant that it didn't retain fingerprints, and there were no other clues. A member of the museum staff was able to authenticate the statue. It was the same statue that had been stolen from the museum, but there were some differences. The museum ascension number was painted onto the back of the sculpture, but someone had removed it in the 4 days that it had been missing. They had also made a new addition to the front of the face. Before the museum had bought the statue, a small heart had been carved into the face above the left eye. When or why it was carved is a mystery, but it seemed to just be a random piece of graffiti. Now there was a matching heart covering the right eye. It wasn't too noticeable unless someone looked for it. The statue went back on display at the museum, but the mystery of who stole it and why remains unsolved. One of the main theories today is that someone stole the head as a Valentine's Day gift. The recipient realized what it was and decided that they didn't want the trouble associated with having a stolen ancient statue and called in the tip themselves. There's been no information released about the caller who sent in the tip or what they sounded like. With 45 years having passed since this heist, it's likely it'll only be solved if the person or people involved come forward with their story. But it remains a fascinating New York City mystery. On March 8, 2016, the family and friends of Chip Michael Campbell were alerted to his disappearance by a Facebook post made by a woman they barely knew. Almost 8 years later, Chip's disappearance and who might have been involved with it remains a mystery. Chip was 36 years old at the time. He was the youngest of 6 children and had spent most of his adult life living with his father in Milton, Florida. His mother had passed away when he was young, leading to mental health problems that resulted in overeating and led to Chip suffering from diabetes. He was a quiet man, described as a gentle giant by one of his older sisters. He had a couple of friends close, but other than that, most of his social circle was made up of his large family. He worked a few odd jobs, but seemed happy enough without having a more serious career. He also had a dog, Harley, who he adored. In the year before Chip's disappearance, his simple life seemed to be spiraling out of control. His father, Reggie, suffered a medical emergency that led to him being placed in an assisted living facility. Chip was now living alone with his dog and seemed to be dealing with serious loneliness. While the Campbell family were very close-knit, Chip's older siblings always tried to look after him. Chip apparently began to seek out companionship from elsewhere, though. He began hanging around with people that his family saw as bad influences. One of Chip's new friends introduced him to a woman named Tanya in November of 2015, and the two became close. Up until this point, Chip had never seemed interested in pursuing a romantic relationship. His family didn't know of any relationship of this kind in Chip's past, but it seemed like that was where his relationship with Tanya was heading. His family didn't know the woman, but Chip brought her up during a Christmas gathering. He claimed she was an out-of-work nurse, but he didn't say much else about her. He didn't go into detail about the extent of the relationship, but according to one of Chip's friends, he'd begun to change for her. Chip usually kept his hair cut short. It was brown and beginning to gray, but in the months before his disappearance, he let his hair grow long and shaggy and started to dye it. He also wore a different style of clothing. This was apparently so he could fit in with Tanya and her friends. Things seemed to be difficult for Chip throughout 2015, but the thing that seemed to make a real difference occurred on the second day of 2016. Chip was exiting a Circle K gas station between Stewart Street and Munson Highway when he became involved in a car accident. Chip continued down the road and then made contact with another car before coming to a stop. Nobody was hurt in the accidents, but Chip was taken to a hospital as he'd suffered a diabetic seizure. This was the official cause of the accidents. After this, Chip lost his driver's license. Up until this point, Chip had been able to lead a relatively normal life. He had a job at a Denny's diner 20 miles away, but that required him to drive. With no license, he decided it would be better to quit the job than to rely on family and friends giving him a ride to work. He was unable to get employment closer to home and applied for disability benefits. He received a small amount of money this way, but would often go to the homes of family members to get something to eat from them. Chip's brother tried to help out, giving him odd jobs to do so that he could earn more money. Unfortunately, nobody seemed to realize the extent of the difficulties Chip was going through. The last time anybody in Chip's family saw him was on March 5th of 2016. His brother dropped him off at the house in Milton after they had run some errands. Chip had gone to the grocery store to pick up some food for himself and his dog and cleaning supplies for the house. A few days later, Chip was tagged in Tanya's post, where she claimed that she hadn't seen him for a few days and he was missing. This was what alerted his family to his disappearance. They were also surprised to learn that Tanya had been living with Chip since the start of the year, although they seemed to only be roommates at this point. Tanya claimed that she had last seen him on March 6th, 2 days before the post was being made. She'd left the house to babysit overnight, and when she came back, Chip was gone. That wasn't all, though. At first, she hadn't been able to get into the house because a reclining chair had been pushed in front of the door. When she got in, she found the house in a state of disarray. The refrigerator was open, and vials of insulin were lying on the kitchen floor. Chip's phone was in the bathroom, and the battery was removed, and a duffel bag of clothes that he'd packed was left in his room. Strangest of all was the fact that Harley, Chip's dog, was roaming around the house and had been bringing in mud from outside. Usually when Chip left the dog home alone, he would put her in a kennel or close her into his bedroom. This was all alarming to Chip's family, who rushed to try to help the search for him. Tanya didn't want to call the police, but Chip was eventually reported missing. The police were able to locate CCTV footage of Chris to help with the search. On March 8th, Chip was caught on camera at the Circle K gas station, where his accident had taken place a few months earlier. He had 2 backpacks with him and looked disheveled. Even in a couple of months, he had lost weight and didn't look well. Chris went into the bathroom at the back of the store and left a short while later. He didn't have the bags with him when he left. The police located the 2 backpacks in a dumpster nearby. The store had kept them for a few days, believing someone would come back for them, but nobody did. Inside, the police found Chip's EBT card, Social Security card, and his father's birth certificate. There were also some medical supplies to help Chip manage diabetes and asthma, and 2 blank bank deposit forms. This only left Chip's family with more questions than answers. They believed that Tanya had been involved with the case. She was arrested on an outstanding warrant for an unrelated crime and disappeared shortly afterward. Even if she didn't have anything to do with the disappearance, it's possible she knows more about Chip's mental state than she told family members. He had apparently been trying to find a way to protect himself months before the disappearance, and may have had a weapon with him when he vanished. It's possible that Chip just decided to live off the grid somewhere, but until he's found, there's no way to know for certain what happened or why. If alive today, Chip would be 44 years old. He's described as being between 6 foot and 6'2", with graying brown hair and brown eyes. He had a tattoo on the inside of his right wrist and on his upper left arm and shoulder of an outer space theme and a frog with bat wings. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office at 850-983-1162. Jacobo Grinberg was a Mexican scientist and spiritualist who disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1994. Theories surrounding his disappearance range from the paranormal to the involvement of the CIA. The subject of his work means his disappearance continues to attract conspiracists, and even as recently as 2023, new theories have been put forward to explain his unusual vanishing. Grinberg was last seen on December 8, 1994. He contacted his daughter, Estusha, to say he was traveling to Nepal to participate in a series of meditations. A few days later, his family organized a birthday party for him, and when he didn't show up, began to try to find their missing relative. Grinberg's sudden disappearance wasn't immediately a cause for too much concern, but as time went on, the family was convinced this wasn't a typical disappearance. Grinberg could be described as a scientist with an interest in the supernatural. He was born in 1946 in Mexico City and became interested in science and spirituality at a young age. His mother passed away when he was still young, which had a profound influence on him. According to family members, photographs taken after this point always showed him looking up or gazing off into the distance. He was interested in studying the human mind, but it was soon clear that he wasn't going to be following any traditional scientific thoughts. At a glance, Grinberg's academic career seems relatively simple. He studied psychology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, then psychophysiology in New York, after coming back to Mexico to teach. He learned a lot about the then current understanding of how the mind worked, and the developing understanding of electrical activity in the brain. He was interested in memory, visual perceptions, and physiological psychology, or how what was physically happening in the brain related to what was happening mentally. With his background, he could have gone on to become successful in the field, but Grinberg believed there was more to perception and how the mind worked than he was taught at university. Even before he enrolled in his first university course, he had taken an interest in the supernatural. He traveled to Israel, where he witnessed a medium using a Ouija board. It was fascinating to him, and he became convinced that spirits could communicate with the living. He dove into the work of various Jewish teachers, trying to decipher a connection between these spiritual practices and what was going on in the mind. Another point of interest for him was shamans and traditional native Mexican belief systems. One of these was a shaman named Pachita, who practiced what was called clean hand surgery. She could cure diseases and perform operations without even being present. He would write about his experiences with Pachita and other shamans, document what they did and what he experienced during the process. As all of this was happening in the 1970s, it's unsurprising that Grinberg also became involved in the counterculture movement, which gave him new ways to explore consciousness and the human mind. All of this helped his research into telepathy and similar feats. One experiment involved trying to get the subjects to read from a piece of paper they couldn't see. This experiment had to be abandoned when the subjects apparently began to see the spirits of people who had already passed. Another experiment involved getting two subjects to try to communicate telepathically, and then monitoring brain waves of both individuals when one was subjected to loud noises and flashing lights. According to Grinberg, the brain waves were similar in about 25% of subjects. From what we know about his research, it seems promising enough, but it was also closely guarded by Grinberg. He only worked with one faithful assistant and refused to allow those students who studied under him to talk about his work with anybody else. He did publish a lot of material during this time, including multiple volumes of books that recounted his experience with the shaman in Mexico. But the scientific side of things seemed to be lacking. Nobody was able to reproduce what he was doing, as his exact methods weren't clear. Grinberg had built up a theory called synergy, which is a combination of words, synthesis, and energy. He believed the world was a matrix of energy and information, which the human mind was a part of. If the mind perceived this information in a different way, it was able to manipulate the world around it using the physical senses most humans know of. This was how Pachita was able to dematerialize material and treat people from a distance. While Grinberg was generally not political, in 1994, he began to connect his beliefs with the Zapatista movement that was growing in Mexico at the time. He was a supporter of the movement, although he wasn't too prominent in the movement. This was happening in the background at the time of his disappearance. He had also become more paranoid recently, and believed he was being followed. The people that were following him did not have good intentions, according to Grinberg. There was also a possible conflict with his second wife, Maria Teresa Mendoza Lopez, who went by Tara. The two would often argue, according to family members, who said that the arguments focused on jealousy. According to his siblings, he left voicemails saying Tara was persecuting him not long before his disappearance. Another fracture in the relationship was that Tara apparently was trying to get Grinberg to reconsider joining a New Age group led by Carlos Castaneda. Grinberg and Castaneda had been friends years earlier, but Grinberg rejected an invitation to join his group and later told friends and family that Castaneda was an egomaniac. The events directly before Grinberg's disappearance remain unclear. He called his daughter to say that he was going to Nepal, but there's no evidence of him ever leaving Mexico. Sometime after he was last seen, Tara cashed a check from Grinberg's book distributor, then told the night watchman at one of the houses that Grinberg owned not to come back to work because Grinberg had flown to Guadalajara, another city in Mexico. Over the next few months, she went back to the house a few times to collect her belongings. On Mother's Day, 1995, she called her mother. Then Tara also disappeared into thin air. There are plenty of theories about what happened to Grinberg. The family suspects Tara might have had something to do with his disappearance. In the time before she also vanished, she gave conflicting accounts about where her husband was. The family claimed that Tara was an imposter who was part of a larger group interested in controlling Grinberg, and she posed a physical threat to him. Some people interested in the case believe that the Castaneda group might have had something to do with the case, though there's really no evidence for this. Another theory is that the CIA was somehow involved. The CIA did have copies of some reports Grinberg had published. There was no evidence that they'd gotten these through any sinister means, but it was interesting that they were also interested in his work. At the time, the CIA was experimenting with mind control and may have found Grinberg's research useful. For some, the CIA took him so that he could continue work for them. Others believe he was disappeared so that he couldn't reveal the truth about mind control to the world. More outlandish theories suggested that he stepped onto a UFO or somehow became Shiva Shambho, a mystic who rose to prominence in the 1990s. The police investigation into Grinberg's disappearance ended quickly, allegedly due to a request from a political figure, which only added to the mystery of what really happened to him. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.